He didn't announce himself. He didn't ask permission. He just walked through the smoke, found her, and carried her out, a 7-year-old boy watching from the doorway, his father disappearing into the fire like it was nothing. The CEO of a billion-dollar company, paralyzed from the waist down, surrounded by people who froze, and the only one who moved, a construction worker in a dusty jacket who looked like he had no business being anyone's hero. But that was before anyone knew what he used to be. Before the Marines showed up and blocked the street. Before everything changed. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will stop you cold. The fundraiser had been Celeste Hawthorne's idea from the beginning, which was the kind of irony that would have made her laugh if she were the type of woman who laughed easily at herself. She wasn't. She'd learned, in the 4 years since the accident that took the use of her legs, that the world moved faster than she did now, and it rarely waited for her to catch up. Westbridge Corporate Academy's annual scholarship basketball fundraiser drew the kind of crowd that made Celeste's public relations team happy and made Celeste herself quietly exhausted. 300 people in a gymnasium that smelled of floor wax and industrial cleaner, dressed in business casual and pretending that watching 18-year-olds fumble layups was genuinely exciting. Celeste's company, Hawthorne Technologies, had sponsored the event for the second year, running not because she loved basketball, but because she believed, with the particular stubbornness that defined most of her decisions, that kids from the Westbridge district deserved better funding for college than the city was willing to provide. She had arrived 40 minutes early, which she always did. Arriving early meant choosing her position before the crowd filled in. It meant controlling the geometry of a room before the room controlled her. Her wheelchair, a lightweight carbon fiber model she'd paid too much for, and would pay again, moved silently across the polished gymnasium floor. She'd positioned herself near the far end of the half-court line, slightly back from the main cluster of donor tables, where she could see the exits clearly and the crowd wouldn't press in around her. 4 years in a chair had taught her spatial awareness she hadn't possessed when she was walking. You noticed different things when your eye level was at most people's waists. The first half of the game was unremarkable. Celeste spoke briefly with 2 school board members, deflected 3 separate attempts to photograph her for social media, and drank half a cup of coffee that had been lukewarm since she'd accepted it. She watched the kids play, genuinely watched them, not with the performed interest of a donor checking a box, but with the quiet attention she gave to anything worth understanding. The point guard had real instincts. The center was raw, but worked harder than anyone else on the floor. Halftime arrived with a buzzer and a sudden surge of movement, as 300 people remembered they needed to find bathrooms and replenish drinks. That's when Travis Kessler appeared. Celeste had been told about him beforehand, the way you're told about weather systems moving in from the coast, not to frighten you, just so you're not caught unprepared. Travis was 17, the only son of Gerald Kessler, who had donated enough money to Westbridge Academy over the previous decade that his name was on a building. The kind of money that has a habit of teaching a certain kind of kid that consequences are optional. He came across the gymnasium floor with 3 of his friends trailing him like he was generating gravity, moving with the particular looseness of someone who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether he was welcome. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of physically large teenager who had figured out early that size could substitute for most other qualities if you deployed it correctly. Celeste noticed him before he reached her. She noticed the direction he was moving, the trajectory, the fact that his eyes had fixed on her with the specific calculation of someone who had already decided something. She turned her chair slightly, intending to wheel toward the refreshment table and simply remove herself from whatever was forming. She'd done it before. She'd become quite good at the quiet exit, the graceful redirect, the strategic disappearance that left everyone involved with their dignity intact. Travis moved to cut her off. "Hey," he said it the way someone says the word when they mean something else entirely. "You're the wheelchair lady, right? The one whose company paid for all this." Celeste looked at him steadily. 30 years old, and she'd spent the last 4 of them having conversations that started exactly like this one. She'd developed a particular expression for it, not cold, exactly. Measured. The face of a woman who had learned that most confrontations were better navigated than won. "Celeste Hawthorne," she said, "and you're Gerald Kessler's son." Something shifted behind his eyes. He hadn't expected her to know his father's name or the mild authority it introduced into the exchange. His friends were watching. That was the real problem, always the audience, always the performance. "My dad donates more to this school than your whole company," Travis said. "Just so you know." "That's not actually true," Celeste said, keeping her voice even, "but I appreciate the confidence." One of his friends made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Travis's jaw tightened. "Must be kind of embarrassing," he said, and now his voice had dropped to something that was intended to be heard only by her, and the two friends closest to him, showing up to events like this. "Everyone acting like you're normal, feeling sorry for you." "Nobody here feels sorry for me," Celeste said. "Sit down, Travis." "I'm not one of your employees." "No," she agreed. "You're a 17-year-old at a high school fundraiser." "Sit down." The crowd around them had begun to thin as people drifted toward the concessions and exits. But some had noticed. Some were already reaching for phones not to intervene, but to record. Celeste clocked it in her peripheral vision. She recognized the particular stillness of people who have decided that observation is safer than action. "You know what's actually funny?" Travis said. He was closer now. Too close, violating the careful spatial geometry she maintained. "Nobody would even notice if you just wheeled on out of here. You didn't need to come. You could have just sent a check." "I go where I choose to go," Celeste said. "Yeah?" His voice had changed again. Something harder underneath. "Let's test that." She reached for her wheel rims to move. He grabbed the handles at the back of her chair. The lurch was sudden, her chair jerking backward, then stopping. Celeste's hands gripped the rims on instinct. The world tilted slightly, the gymnasium floor seeming closer than it should. "Let go of my chair," she said. Her voice was flat and specific, the way a pilot's voice is flat and specific when something has gone wrong. Controlled not because she wasn't afraid she was, a cold adrenaline spike she felt in her chest and her wrists, and nowhere else, but because panic was not a tool that served her in this particular moment. "I'm just helping," Travis said, loud enough now for the surrounding cluster of students and parents to hear. "She looks like she needs help getting out." Laughter from somewhere behind him. "Take your hands off my chair. You should be grateful. You should say thank you." He wasn't laughing. The performance had shifted into something uglier and more private. "That's what you people do, right? You need help with everything, and then you don't even—" She tried to turn. He moved with her, keeping the chair locked. One of his friends had come around the side and was now gripping the left wheel, preventing her from maneuvering. 300 people in this gymnasium. Phones rising everywhere. A school fundraiser in the middle of the afternoon. And Celeste Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Technologies, operating revenue over $400 million in the previous fiscal year, a woman who had rebuilt herself from a hospital bed up, was trapped. Physically trapped in a public space by a 17-year-old who had never been told no in any language he actually understood. Then Travis's arm came around from behind, not his hands on the chair. His arm around her neck. Not hard, not immediately hard, but present. Restraining. A demonstration of capability. "Say thank you," he said quietly. Right next to her ear. "Come on. It's not that difficult." The gymnasium sounds faded strangely. Her pulse was in her ears. She could feel the muscles in her neck, resisting. The automatic clench of her jaw, the way her hands had gone to the armrests of her chair with no memory of putting them there. She didn't say anything. The arm tightened fractionally. Around them, nobody moved. The phones kept rising. Someone's voice, distant and confused, said something that was swallowed by the ambient noise of the space. A parent somewhere had seen something and looked away. A teacher on the far side of the gym was walking toward the doors, oblivious, coffee in hand. Celeste's eyes tracked the crowd with the precision of someone cataloging exits. She calculated distances. She measured the geometry of what was possible. And underneath the calculation, quiet and cold and entirely separate from it, was something that felt very much like grief, not for herself, not exactly, but for the specific species of cruelty that required an audience, that needed witnesses, not so it could be stopped, but so it could be witnessed. So it could be real. Nobody was coming. The gym doors burst open. She almost missed it, a sound. The distinctive mechanical clang of heavy gymnasium doors thrown wide, different from the gradual drift of people moving through. Different in the way a sudden sound is different from background noise, landing in the body before the mind has processed it. The man who came through those doors wasn't running. That was the first thing she registered. He wasn't moving fast. He was moving with the particular economy of someone who had already assessed the room before entering it and was now crossing to a specific point with the exact amount of speed required, no more. He looked like a construction worker. Dusty work pants, a faded dark jacket, the kind of hands that belong to someone who uses them for a living. 37 maybe, though she couldn't have said exactly. A face that had spent time outdoors and hadn't been particularly protected from it. And at his side, holding his hand, was a small boy with a blue jacket and serious eyes, who was 7 years old at the absolute most. The man's gaze crossed the room in what appeared to be a single, efficient sweep. Then it landed on her. Then it landed on the arm around her neck. The boy looked up at his father. "Dad," the boy said, quiet, a question without a word. The man let go of his son's hand. "Stay here, Eli," he said. His voice was level, not urgent, not performatively calm, the way people sound when they're suppressing panic. Just level, like a carpenter reading a measurement. "Right here. Don't move." Then he walked forward. Travis hadn't seen him yet. He was still leaning close to Celeste's ear, saying something she'd stopped processing, performing for his friends. The friend on the wheel had loosened his grip slightly, distracted by someone nearby. The man reached them in what felt to Celeste like no time at all, and yet she was aware of every step. She was aware because she watched his face the entire time, and his face didn't change. No anger, no aggression, no performance. He stopped 2 feet behind Travis. "Take your arm off her," he said. Travis turned his head. He had to angle to see who was speaking, because the man was behind him, and the arm was still where it was. Travis looked at him the way teenagers look at adults who've failed to understand the social order they've interrupted. "Who are you?" Travis said. "Take your arm off her," the man said again. Exactly the same tone, exactly the same volume. Get lost. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Celeste would later have difficulty reconstructing it in linear order because it didn't feel linear. It felt simultaneous, a controlled sequence that was also a single action. The man's left hand found Travis's wrist. His right hand reached across, and there was a specific movement that Celeste's body understood before her mind did a rotation, a redirect, a use of Travis's own leverage against him. Travis listened a sound that was surprise more than pain, and then he was not standing anymore. He was kneeling on the gymnasium floor with his arm behind him, in a hold that was precise enough to be entirely controlled and uncomfortable enough to be entirely effective. Not violent, not brutal, nothing that should have drawn blood or left a mark. The friend on the wheel had let go immediately, stepping back with his hands up, which suggested he had understood, on some level, what he was looking at. Travis was breathing hard. His face, when he turned it upward, had changed entirely. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was just a teenager who'd run out of room. The man released him, stepped back, didn't stand over him. Then he came around to her side. He crouched down, eye level with her, and that face, that entirely level face, became something different. Not softer exactly, attentive. "Can you breathe okay?" he asked. She realized, with a small shock, that nobody had asked her that. In the last several minutes of everything that had happened, nobody had asked her that. "Yes," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Your neck hurt anywhere?" "No, I'm fine, a beat." "I'm fine." He nodded once as though that was settled, and looked briefly at her chair, the handles, the wheels, checking with his eyes whether anything had been damaged. Then small footsteps crossed the floor. The boy, Eli, arrived at his father's elbow, looking at Celeste with enormous brown eyes and very little of the uncertainty you'd expect from a 7-year-old who'd just watched his father take a teenager to the floor. He held out a water bottle. "We always have one," Eli said, with the particular seriousness of a child delivering important information. "Dad says you should always have water. He gives it to people who get hurt." Celeste looked at the water bottle, then at the boy. "Thank you, Eli," she said. "You knew my name," Eli said, surprised. "Your dad said it." "Oh, he considered this. Are you okay?" "Getting there," she said, which was honest. Around them, the gymnasium had rearranged itself. The crowd that had produced only phones during the confrontation had drawn closer now that it was over. Someone was speaking into their own phone, not filming calling, she thought, probably for security or administration. Travis had gotten up from the floor and moved away, to where his friends were gathered near the bleachers, not looking at anyone. His face was still wrong. Hollowed out, the man stood. He was taller than she'd realized, with the posture of someone who carried a lot of weight in a particular way, not heaviness, but density. The kind of stillness that isn't stiffness. "Does this school have security?" he asked her. "They should be coming," Celeste said. "Are you with anyone tonight?" "My assistant. She's somewhere in the crowd. You want me to find her?" Celeste looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at balance sheets and engineering specs, and people she was interviewing for senior positions completely, with the particular attention she gave to things she needed to understand accurately. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rowan Voss." Rowan. She tried it once, like a door you check before trusting your weight to. "I'm Celeste Hawthorne." "I know," he said. "Your photo's on the banner." She glanced at the entrance, where a 6-foot promotional banner did indeed feature her face and company logo. She'd forgotten about that. "So you knew who I was before you came over," she said. "Didn't matter who you were," he said. He said it without weight, without performance. Like it was simply the answer to a question about a fact. You couldn't get out, that mattered. She held that for a moment. In 4 years of navigating a world that constantly required her to explain herself, justify herself, prove herself, fight for the dignity of being treated as a complete person in a body that moved differently than most. Nobody has said anything quite like that to her. Not because it was eloquent. It wasn't. But because it was accurate, and it was immediate, and it contained no pity whatsoever. School security arrived 2 minutes later, moving with the brisk discomfort of people who'd been caught not being where they should have been. Rowan spoke to them briefly, gave his name and phone number when asked, and answered 3 questions with the kind of precision that suggested he'd given statements before and knew exactly which details mattered. Then he looked at Eli, who had remained exactly where he'd been told to remain, and held out his hand. Eli took it. "Is she going to be okay?" Eli asked his father, not whispering, just asking. "Yeah," Rowan said. "She's going to be fine." He glanced back at her once. Not the way you look at someone you've rescued, not that particular backward glance that wants credit, that wants acknowledgement, that wants to see the gratitude on someone's face. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you want to confirm they're standing on solid ground. Then Rowan Voss walked back across the gymnasium floor toward the doors with his 7-year-old son, and the crowd parted for him without entirely understanding why, and the doors closed behind them both, and he was gone. Celeste sat in her wheelchair in the middle of that gymnasium, the half-empty water bottle in her hand, the sounds of the crowd buzzing back to life around her. She thought about the 4 seconds it had taken him to end what had taken Travis 5 minutes to build. She thought about the boy's face, serious and kind and entirely unafraid. She thought about what Rowan had said. You couldn't get out. That mattered. By the time her assistant found her 8 minutes later, breathless, horrified, phone already recording, voice memos the videos were already spreading. 40, then 100, then 400 shares before midnight, the clip grainy and cut wrong, but showing everything that needed to be seen. What they didn't show was what Celeste was still thinking about, alone at the center of all of it. Not the arm around her neck, not the crowd that watched, not even the 4 seconds, but the face of a man who had looked at her after it was over, really looked at her and had not seen a victim or a billionaire or a woman in a wheelchair. He had just seen her, and she could not, for the rest of that night, figure out why that was the thing that stayed. The videos multiplied the way things multiply online when they contain something people recognize as real, not edited for maximum impact, just a raw and uncomfortable truth captured at an angle that happened to be correct. By 7 the next morning, the clip had been shared across 4 different platforms. By noon, it had been picked up by 2 local news stations. By the following day, national outlets were running it under headlines that ranged from measured to incendiary, depending on which version of the story each publication had decided to tell. Most of them had decided to tell the wrong one. Celeste found out from her assistant, Maya, who appeared in her office doorway at 6:45 in the morning, with the particular expression of someone delivering news they've been rehearsing on the elevator ride up. The Kessler family has retained counsel, Maya said, setting a tablet on Celeste's desk without preamble. Their statement went out at midnight. Celeste looked at the screen. The statement was 3 paragraphs, polished and lawyered and cold, in the specific way that things written by committees of expensive people become cold. The operative sentence was in the second paragraph. Our client, a minor, was subjected to an unprovoked physical assault by an unidentified adult male at a private school event, and we are cooperating fully with local law enforcement to ensure this individual is identified and held accountable. She read it twice. Unprovoked, she said. There are 2 versions of the video circulating, Maya said. The full 2 minutes and 40 seconds, which shows everything, and a 15-second clip that starts right at the moment Rowan Voss moves toward Travis. That's the one the Kessler lawyers are using. Celeste set the tablet down with a precision that was not gentleness. Find Rowan Voss, she said. I'm already whatever you need to do, find him. It took Maya 4 hours, which was faster than it should have been, and slower than Celeste needed it to be. What Maya found, she delivered in person, rather than by text or email, which told Celeste something about what the information contained before a single word was spoken. Rowan Voss, 37. No criminal record. No civil judgments. No bankruptcies. Construction worker, currently employed by a mid-sized renovation contractor called Halcyon Build. Single father to Eli Voss, 7 years old. Address, a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Merritt Street, 12 minutes from Westbridge Academy. No family listed locally. Emergency contact, a former colleague named D. Reyes, address in Portland, Oregon. His wife's name had been Nora. She died 4 years ago. The cause of death was not in anything Maya had found, and Celeste didn't ask. His military service was partially accessible through public records. United States Navy, honorably discharged. The specifics of his unit and assignments were not publicly available in any form that Maya could locate through standard channels, which was itself a specific kind of information. He's losing jobs, Maya said. The Kessler lawyers started calling contractors this morning. Halcyon Build suspended him pending the investigation. 2 other companies he'd done work for in the last year have already declined comment when reached by reporters, which in practice means they won't hire him again. Celeste looked out the window. 53rd floor. The city spread below her in all directions, miniature and gridded, the kind of view that was supposed to make problems feel proportionate. It had never worked that way for her, but she kept the office for the light. He has a 7-year-old son, she said. Yes, and they're pulling his income. They're moving fast, Maya said. Gerald Kessler has been on the board of 3 of the contracting firms in that district for years. It's not even subtle. Celeste turned back from the window. There was a specific anger she had cultivated over the last 4 years, not hot, not reactive, but particular. The kind of anger that didn't make noise, that didn't require an audience, but that was also entirely unwilling to sit still. Get me the name of whoever is leading the Kessler legal team, she said, and pull the security footage from the gymnasium. The school has cameras. I need copies of everything from halftime onward, and I need them before their lawyers think to ask the school to preserve access. Maya was already writing. You're going to counter. I'm going to make sure the man who protected me doesn't lose his apartment because a 17-year-old's father has friends on contractor boards. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Yes, I'm going to counter. She called Rowan Voss herself that afternoon. He picked up on the 3rd ring with the flat, careful hello of someone who'd been fielding calls from unknown numbers all day and had developed a policy about them. This is Celeste Hawthorne, she said. A brief silence. I have a pretty good guess how you got this number, he said. My assistant is resourceful, so I gathered. Another pause, and she could hear something in the background, a television, children's programming, the specific cadence of animated voices. How are you doing? Your neck, I'm fine, she said, and then, because she recognized the question as genuine and not performative, added, honestly, I'm fine. They didn't hurt me. You got there before that was a real possibility. You don't know that, he said. Not arguing, just accurate. No, she admitted, I don't. What can I do for you, Miss Hawthorne? Celeste. She said it before she'd consciously decided to. And you can start by telling me whether you have a lawyer. The pause this time was longer. I haven't needed one before, he said finally. You need one now. The Kessler family issued a statement last night characterizing what you did as an unprovoked assault on a minor. They're circulating an edited version of the video that removes the entire first 2 minutes of context. And they've been making calls to your employer and, I believe, other contractors in the district. She heard him exhale, not sharply controlled, like someone releasing air from a pressure valve very carefully. I figured something like that was coming, he said. Does that mean you're not surprised, or that you think you deserve it? Neither, he said. It means I've dealt with people who have money and lawyers before. It doesn't usually go well for the person without money and lawyers. It's going to go differently this time. Miss Hawthorne Celeste, she could hear him shifting, moving somewhere, the television sounds receding. He'd stepped away from Eli, she realized. I appreciate what you're saying. I do, but I'm not looking for a fight with the Kessler family. I'm a single father with a construction job and a kid who starts second grade in 3 weeks. I don't want media attention. I don't want a legal battle. I just want to go back to being invisible. The silence was different this time. That's not what I said, he said. I know, she said. I'm sorry. That was unfair. She meant it. But Rowan, they've already started. They called your employer this morning. You're suspended. This isn't something you can step away from. They've decided you're a problem they need to remove, and they have resources to do it. And you want to help, yes. Why? It was a direct question, and it deserved a direct answer. She'd expected it, and she'd prepared for it, but sitting in her office with the city below her, and his voice quiet and careful on the phone, the prepared answer felt insufficient. Because you protected me when no one else did, she said. Because what's happening to you right now is a direct consequence of that, which makes it partly my responsibility. And because she started again. Because I've spent 4 years watching people with power use it to make other people smaller. I'm in a position to do something about it in this particular case. So I'm going to. He was quiet for long enough that she wondered whether she'd said something wrong. I've got Eli to think about, he said. I know. He doesn't need to watch his dad fight with rich people on the news. He also doesn't need to watch his dad lose his income because a rich kid's family decided to make an example of him, she said. She said it carefully, not to wound, but to be honest. She was better at honesty than comfort. Another pause. Then, what kind of help are you offering? My legal team is already pulling the gymnasium security footage. I want to file a counterstatement to the Kessler attorney's public claims before the end of the week. I'd like my lawyers to represent you in any proceeding that follows, and I want them to look at whether Halcyon Build's suspension constitutes wrongful action given the circumstances. Additionally, I want to make sure you have housing security through this process, in case. I'm not taking money from you. She had expected that too. She waited. I'm not, he said again. I hear what you're saying about the lawyers and the footage, and I'll think about that. But I'm not taking money. I understand, she said. Which she did, and not just strategically. She understood it the way you understand something in your chest rather than your head. That's not what I was offering. I was going to say that if you end up in a position where your income is compromised long enough to affect your housing, I know of a trust that provides emergency bridge assistance to families in employment disputes. It's not connected to me financially. I just know it exists. A beat. You prepared for that answer, he said. I prepared for several answers, she admitted. I've been running a company for 8 years. I've been in a wheelchair for 4. I've learned to anticipate the conversations people feel they need to have before they can accept help they need. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but it had the shape of one. All right, he said. Tell me about the lawyers. She met the legal team in person the following morning. Her firm's senior litigation partner, a woman named Adrienne Park, who had a reputation for dismantling corporate libel claims with the particular satisfaction of someone who genuinely enjoyed her work, had already reviewed what was publicly available. The edited video is their biggest asset, Adrienne said, spreading printed screenshots across the conference table. What they're circulating starts here. She pointed to a frame that showed Rowan's hand on Travis's arm. Everything before that, the restraint, the phone, the physical contact with your chair, the arm around your neck isn't visible. On its own, that clip looks like a man grabbing a teenager. The full video is already online, Celeste said. It's competing with the edited version, and the edited version is the one the Kessler statement is built around. Their lawyers will argue that the full video has been selectively shared by parties with an interest in the outcome. Mud gets thrown both ways in that argument. Adrian clicked her pen 3 times, a habit Celeste had noticed in previous meetings. We need the original security footage. Unedited chain of custody intact. That's our foundation. Maya's been on the school since yesterday morning. Good. We also need statements from anyone who was present and witnessed the sequence of events. The more people, the better, but specifically anyone who can testify to the physical contact before Voss entered the gym. I was there. Adrian looked at her steadily. You were the person in the chair, Celeste. You'll be the most compelling witness and the most attacked witness. Your credibility will be the primary target. We need corroboration. Celeste nodded. She'd known this. She'd known it the way you know the diagnosis you've been expecting when the doctor finally says it aloud, not surprised, just now having to process it as real. Rowan arrived at 12:30. He came into the conference room with the same qualities she'd noticed at the gymnasium, not military stiffness exactly, more like the absence of wasted movement. He was wearing clean clothes that were not quite right for a law office, not because he'd made no effort, but because the law office context was new and he hadn't oriented to it yet. He shook hands with Adrian, nodded at the 2 junior associates, and then his eyes found Celeste. You look better than you did 2 nights ago, he said. Lower bar, she said. Sit down, he sat. Adrian walked him through the legal landscape with the clarity she used with clients who needed information rather than reassurance. Rowan asked 4 questions during the entire briefing, all of them specific, none of them about himself. 2 were about what the process would mean for Eli's schedule. 1 was about the school's legal exposure. 1 was about the chain of custody on the security footage, which made Adrian pause and then look at him with slightly more attention than she'd been giving him before. You've dealt with evidentiary procedure before, Adrian said. In a different context, Rowan said and didn't expand. Adrian clicked her pen again. Right, she moved on. The weight of what was bearing down on him became clearer over the following days, as it always did, not all at once, but in accumulation. The local news ran 3 segments, 2 of them framing the story as contested, one of them a morning program with a panel openly suggesting that Voss had escalated a teenage disagreement into a violent confrontation. The reporter outside his apartment building appeared on the second morning. Rowan stopped using the front entrance. Eli knew something was wrong. He was 7, not stupid, and he had his father's particular quality of attention. He noticed things without making obvious that he'd noticed them. Dad, he said on the 3rd evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his dinosaur worksheet half finished in front of him. Are we in trouble? Rowan was making pasta. Nothing complicated. The kind of dinner that existed because it was Tuesday and they needed food and he'd remembered to buy the jar sauce. He turned from the stove. I'm handling something at work, he said. It's going to be okay. Eli looked at him with the serious brown eyes that had always been more his mother's than his. Is it because of what happened at the basketball thing? Yeah. Because you helped that lady? Yeah. Eli was quiet for a moment, processing this in the methodical way. He processed things that didn't make immediate sense to him. But you were supposed to help her, he said. Rowan turned back to the pasta. He stirred it for a moment. His throat had done something he wasn't prepared for. You're right, he said. I was. So why is it a problem? Because sometimes doing the right thing makes people angry. Especially people who didn't expect to be stopped. Eli thought about this for another moment. Then, are we going to have to move? No, Rowan said. He said it flat and specific. We're not moving. He said it the way he'd said things in other contexts, in other years, in another life, when the words had to hold weight because the people receiving them needed something solid to push against. He said it because it was true, and because he was going to make it true, even if he had to figure out exactly how to do that in the next 36 hours. He didn't tell Eli about the job. He didn't tell him that the reporter had apparently gotten his number from somewhere and left 4 voicemails. He didn't tell him that the Kessler attorneys had sent a formal demand letter to his address, physical mail, hand-delivered, as if the gesture itself was meant to demonstrate something about reach and resource. What he did do that night after Eli was asleep was sit at the kitchen table with his phone and call the only person whose voice he could stand to hear in this specific kind of situation. D. Reyes answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been expecting the call. I've been watching the news, Reyes said. He had a voice like gravel and old coffee, and he'd known Rowan since they were 22 years old, doing things in places that neither of them talked about anymore. How bad is it? Bad enough, Rowan said. They went after my job. Expected. And they're outside my building with cameras. Also expected. Rowan A. Pause. You should have just let someone else handle it. There wasn't anyone else, Rowan said. A sound that might have been a sigh. No, there wouldn't be. Another pause. What do you need? Nothing right now. Just he stopped, looked at the kitchen in the low light. The dinosaur worksheet still on the table, the jar of pasta sauce with the lid not quite screwed back on. Just to hear somebody who actually knows what happened tell me I didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, Reyes said immediately. No hesitation, no qualification, not even a little. Rowan exhaled. The woman, Reyes said. The CEO, is she going to help? Or is she going to disappear when it gets complicated? Rowan thought about the phone call, the way Celeste had prepared for his refusals. The way she'd said I know when he mentioned Eli, and it hadn't been the automatic I know of someone acknowledging a fact, it had been the I know of someone who'd actually thought about what that meant. I don't think she disappears, he said. Good, Reyes said. You need someone with resources. Don't be an idiot about accepting help. I have a condition about the money. Of course you do. I'm serious. I know you're serious. That's what worries me. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Rowan, your kid needs his dad to still have a roof over his head in 6 months. Your pride is not the relevant variable. It's not about pride. What's it about? Rowan thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. The way he thought about things when Reyes asked, which was differently than he thought about them alone. I spent a long time, he said slowly, doing things because someone with resources pointed me in a direction and told me it needed doing. I'm done being pointed. A long pause. She's not pointing you at anything, Reyes said. She's offering to stand next to you. Rowan didn't answer. There's a difference, Reyes said. Celeste found out about the demand letter the same morning. It arrived at Rowan's apartment. Adrian called her before 7, which meant Adrian had gotten the information from Rowan directly, which meant he'd called the lawyers without Celeste having to push him toward it. She noted that. She was on her second coffee and a call with Adrian when Maya appeared in the doorway again, and the expression this time was different from the morning after the gym. What? Celeste said. Maya held up her tablet. A different kind of headline. Not about Rowan, about her. The angle the Kessler PR team had found, after apparently spending 3 days looking, was a profile piece that had run 2 years earlier in a business magazine, a piece Celeste had done reluctantly, that had spent considerable time on her injury and her rehabilitation and her use of a wheelchair, framed with the kind of motivational language she'd hated at the time and hated worse now because it was being quoted selectively, and the quotes being selected were the ones that made it possible to construct a narrative in which Celeste's judgment about what had happened at the gymnasium was affected by her emotional state and personal history. The word fragile appeared in the emerging coverage. Not from the original article, from the adjacent commentary. Celeste read it twice. She set the tablet down. She sat very still for a moment, which was something she did when she was angry enough that the anger needed a container. Then she said, "Get Adrian back on the phone, and get me everything you can find about Gerald Kessler's board relationships and the contracting firms he's connected to. All of it. Already started," Maya said, "and find out who wrote that commentary piece. I want to know who they talked to." By the end of the week, the security footage had been secured through a formal legal request that left the school's administration very little comfortable room for delay. What the footage showed was, as Adrian had predicted, unambiguous, but the particulars of unambiguous were worth paying attention to. The footage showed Travis approaching Celeste. It showed the escalation over 7 minutes in high definition, with timestamps, from 2 separate camera angles. It showed the arm. It showed Rowan entering, crossing the floor, and the 4-second sequence that the lawyers on the other side had been describing as a violent assault. Watching it was different from having been in the room. Celeste watched it once, alone, in Adrian's conference room after everyone else had gone home. She watched the 7 minutes. She watched herself, the particular stillness of her face, the hands on the armrests, the calculation she'd been running while Travis talked. She watched the people around them. She counted the phones. She watched Rowan walk through the doors. She watched the 4 seconds. She stopped the footage there and sat in the empty conference room for a while. The story that was beginning to emerge from other students, from parents who'd been present, from 2 teachers who had now given statements, was worse than the single incident suggested. Travis Kessler's behavior at Westbridge Academy was not new. It had been reported, and the reports had gone somewhere unreachable, into the particular administrative silence that forms around families with buildings named after them. 2 students had already contacted Adrian's office after the footage request became public. By Friday, there were 4. "He's done this before," Adrian said when they spoke Thursday morning. Different forms, different targets. Mostly students, but there were 2 parents at events. One of them a mother who tried to formally complain, withdrew the complaint 3 weeks after filing it. Did anyone speak to her about why? Her employer received a call, Adrian said. "We're not sure from whom." Celeste absorbed this. "We're not just defending Rowan anymore," she said. "No," Adrian agreed. "We're building a pattern." She told Rowan on Friday. She'd been doing that, telling him directly, not through the lawyers, not through Maya. He'd had his number, she'd used it, and they'd developed a working arrangement in which she passed him information, and he asked the precise questions that told her what he actually needed to know from it. "There are other victims," she said. "How many?" 4 confirmed statements so far. Adrian thinks there are more. A silence. How old? Students, his age or younger. One was a 15-year-old girl who plays on the school's junior soccer team. Travis confronted her in the parking lot after a game last spring. She heard him exhale. That same controlled exhale she'd heard on the first call, the pressure valve. They knew, he said. Not a question. The administration knew. Documented reports existed, and they buried them. Yes. The silence that followed had a different quality from his other silences. She'd started to be able to read them, the pause that was calculation, the pause that was emotion being processed before it found shape, the pause that was him deciding whether to say the thing he was actually thinking. "My son's 7, he said finally. He goes to Dunmore Elementary, which is 4 miles from Westbridge. And there are people at that school, and the one next to it, and the one after that, who have been told that their kids don't matter as much as a kid whose dad donated enough to get his name on a building." He stopped. That's what gets buried. Not just Travis. The whole system that makes Travis possible. Celeste was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly it." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, "How are you actually doing? Not the case." "You." She blinked. She was at her desk, late afternoon, the city doing its long orange thing with the light through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I'm okay," she said. "That's the same answer you gave me in the gym." It was true then. Is it true now? She thought about the conference room and the empty footage and counting the phones. She thought about the word fragile in a headline someone had constructed specifically to undermine her. Some days, she said, honest for the second time with this man in a week, which was a higher frequency than she generally managed with anyone. Not always. "Yeah," he said. "That's actually an okay answer." She almost smiled. She wasn't sure she actually did. Her face felt complicated about it, but the thing that happened around her mouth was in the neighborhood of a smile. "Rowan," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for answering when I call." A pause. "You're the one helping me. We're helping each other," she said. That's different. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly warmer, slightly less careful. The way voices shift when the conversation has moved somewhere, the speaker didn't entirely plan for. "How's Eli?" she asked before she'd consciously decided to. "He finished his dinosaur worksheet," Rowan said. "Was it good?" He got every question right except the one about the Triceratops, which he got wrong because he was distracted by something on television and not because he doesn't know it. "He knows it. That's reassuring. He asks about you," Rowan said. "Not every day. But he asked whether the lady from the gym was going to be okay." Something happened in her chest, small and specific and entirely unexpected. "Tell him yes," she said. "I already did," he said. The line was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortably, just the natural pause of 2 people who'd reached the edge of one kind of conversation and hadn't yet decided whether to step into another. "I should let you go," she said. "Yeah." Neither of them moved immediately to end the call. Then Rowan said, "Whatever they throw at us next week, we're going to be okay." I just wanted to say that. She looked at the city. The light was going copper and long now, The way it got in the last hour before dark when the season was just beginning to turn. I know, she said. And for the first time since the gymnasium, she actually did. The counterstatement went out on a Monday morning, and by Tuesday, the landscape had shifted enough that Celeste could feel it not resolved, not safe, but different. Adrian's team had filed simultaneously on 3 fronts: a formal rebuttal to the Kessler attorney's public claims, a preservation order on all school administrative records relating to complaints filed against Travis Kessler in the previous 4 years, and a letter to Halcyon Build's legal department outlining the specific employment law implications of suspending a worker in direct response to pressure from a third party with no standing in any actual proceeding. Halcyon Build reinstated Rowan by Wednesday afternoon. The call came from the company's operations manager, who spoke in the careful, over-neutral tone of someone reading from notes prepared by their own lawyer. Rowan thanked him briefly, asked when he was expected back on site, and hung up without elaborating. He told Celeste about it that evening. She was still in her office, which had become a habit for both of them in the past 2 weeks: the late calls, the debriefs, the particular rhythm of 2 people working the same problem from different positions. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I shouldn't have needed a CEO's law firm to keep my job," he said. "Fair. I'm not ungrateful," he added, and she could hear him making the effort to be accurate. "I just don't love what it took." "I know," she said. "Neither do I." The Kessler attorneys, having lost the first exchange, went quieter for several days, which Adrian interpreted not as retreat but as reorganization. Celeste interpreted it the same way. She had enough experience with aggressive legal opposition to know that silence was rarely surrender. It was inventory. They were counting what they still had. What they still had, it turned out, was Gerald Kessler himself. He made a single public appearance, a brief statement outside the family's attorney's office. Gerald in a charcoal suit with his hair exactly right, flanked by lawyers, and a woman, Celeste, recognized as a professional media consultant he'd seen at 3 different corporate crisis events over the past 5 years. Gerald was 61, had the compressed, deliberate bearing of a man who'd spent decades being obeyed, and spoke for 47 seconds. He expressed concern for his son's well-being. He described the incident as having been mischaracterized. He used the phrase "my family's commitment to this community" twice. He did not mention Celeste by name. He did not mention Rowan by name. The names didn't matter to Gerald. She understood that watching him. What mattered to Gerald was the shape of the narrative, and the shape he was building was one in which his family was the party that had been harmed. What he didn't know, what the Kessler legal team apparently hadn't learned yet, was that by Wednesday morning, the total number of students and parents who had given formal statements to Adrian's team had reached 11. 11 separate incidents, spanning 3 years, all buried. Adrian called Celeste at 7:45 Thursday morning, which was her version of urgency. "We have a problem," Adrian said, "but it's the kind of problem that contains an opportunity if we're careful. Tell me." 3 of the families who came forward are now being contacted by the Kessler attorneys. Informal contact, not formal legal pressure, technically, but the message being communicated is fairly clear. 2 of the families have already indicated they may withdraw their statements. Celeste's jaw tightened. They're intimidating witnesses. "They're having conversations," Adrian said, with the specific dryness of a lawyer making a legal distinction. Conversations that happen to occur in contexts where the families are aware of Gerald Kessler's relationship to their children's school, their employers, their community organizations. A beat. It's elegant, in the way that things are elegant when they've been practiced. What's the opportunity? If we can document the pattern of contact when it happened, who was approached, what was said, we potentially have obstruction. Not the informal kind, the kind that matters in front of a judge. Adrian paused again. "But we need to move carefully. If we push too hard trying to capture it, we spook them and they stop. If we don't push hard enough, 2 more families walk, and we lose the breadth of the pattern." Celeste thought about this for exactly 12 seconds. "Talk to Rowan," she said. "Why Rowan specifically?" "Because he understands how to collect information without announcing that he's collecting it," she said. "And because the families who came forward did so, partly because of what he did at that gymnasium. They trust him in a way they don't trust us yet." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "He's not an investigator." "No," Celeste said. "He's something better. He's the reason any of this exists. Ask him to talk to the families." Not to gather evidence, just to talk. Let them know they're not alone in this. She heard Adrian's pen clicking. That's actually smart, Adrian said. I have my moments. Rowan agreed, without much deliberation, which didn't surprise her. What surprised her was Eli Thigh. She found out because Rowan mentioned it on their Thursday call, not making anything of it, just noting it the way he noted things that had happened in his day. Eli asked if he could come with me, Rowan said, when I go to talk to the families. What did you tell him? I said no because it's not appropriate, and also because he'd get bored in about 15 minutes and start asking whether there's a dog. A pause. But he said that maybe if people see that I have a kid, they'll know I'm not scary. Celeste was quiet for a moment. He's not wrong, she said. I know he's not wrong, Rowan said. He's 7, and he's figured out something that took me until I was 30 to understand, which is that the most disarming thing in the world is honesty. A pause. He's been doing that his whole life. I don't know where he gets it. You know exactly where he gets it, she said. He didn't answer, but the silence had the particular quality of something deceived rather than deflected. She found herself thinking about that later sitting in the back of her car, on the way from a board meeting, the city moving past the windows in the particular way it moved, when she had enough mental space to actually see it. She thought about Rowan's silences. She thought about Eli's face in the gymnasium, serious and unafraid, holding out a water bottle with both hands. She thought about the word Rowan had used disarming and how she'd spent 4 years since the accident constructing the opposite. Every wall she'd built had been deliberate. Every distance she'd maintained had been chosen. She'd told herself it was efficiency. She'd told herself she simply didn't have time for certain kinds of intimacy. She'd told herself a lot of things, in the quiet of her apartment at the end of days, that were full enough to pass for a complete life. She was getting better lately at noticing when she was telling herself things. The following week moved the way weeks move when a legal situation has found its rhythm forward, but not visibly. Adrian's team documented the witness contact attempts. 3 of the families held. Rowan visited 5 of them over 4 days and none of them withdrew. He did not bring Eli, but he brought himself, which apparently was enough. The school district, meanwhile, had begun its own quiet calculation. 2 board members who had previously declined any comment issued a joint statement calling for an independent administrative review. The principal of Westbridge Academy hired a lawyer of her own. The director of student affairs, who had signed off on at least 3 of the buried complaint responses, went on what was publicly described as medical leave. The structure was showing cracks. Celeste watched it happen with the particular attention she gave to situations that were moving correctly, but hadn't resolved yet, with patience she'd built rather than inherited. Patience that was always a little bit effortful, and therefore, she thought, a little more honest than the natural kind. It was on a Thursday evening, 11 days after the counterstatement, that everything changed again. She'd been at a late corporate event, a digital infrastructure conference, at the Meridian Center downtown. The kind of event where the name badges are laminated, and the coffee is surprisingly good, and 200 people spend 3 hours agreeing with each other about things they already agreed about. She'd stayed through the keynote, and the first half of the reception, which was 40 minutes more than she'd wanted to, but 20 minutes less than her PR team had asked for, and she'd made her peace with the compromise. The Meridian Center's parking structure was a 6-level concrete facility attached to the building by a sky bridge on the 2nd floor. Her driver, a quiet man named Patrick who had worked for her for 2 years and had long since stopped being surprised by her preferences, had brought the car to level 3, as she'd asked, not the bottom level, which was poorly lit, but not high enough that an elevator failure would strand her. She'd learned to think that way about buildings, the way she thought about rooms. You mapped the vulnerabilities before you needed to know them. Patrick had texted her that he was running 4 minutes behind. She was alone in the elevator when it opened onto level 3. The structure smelled of concrete and exhaust, and the particular staleness of spaces that don't get enough airflow. Her wheels moved quietly on the painted floor. The overhead fluorescents threw their indifferent light down in long, flat columns. She'd gone maybe 40 feet from the elevator when she heard the footsteps. Not one set, multiple. The specific percussion of a group moving with collective purpose rather than the dispersed randomness of people going to their cars. She turned her chair. Travis Kessler was walking toward her with 3 boys at his back. She placed them, the The two from the gymnasium she recognized, the one who'd gripped her wheel, and a heavy-set boy who'd been standing at the periphery. The third she didn't know. All of them 17 or 18. All of them with the particular looseness that told her this had been arranged rather than spontaneous. Travis had changed since the gymnasium. She noticed it immediately, not in his size or bearing, but in his face. The performance quality was gone. Whatever entertained him about cruelty at the fundraiser, the social ritual of it, the audience of it, had been stripped away by 2 weeks of legal consequences and public exposure. What was underneath was not chastened. It was something harder. Something that had found its cause in her specifically. No security tonight, Travis said. He stopped about 10 feet away. His friends spread across the lane behind him. Celeste looked at him steadily. Her hands were on the wheel rims. Travis, she said. Whatever you think this accomplishes. You got my dad on the news, he said. My family. You made this public, and now everyone's looking at us like we did something. You did something. His jaw went tight. An investigation. The school. They're pulling records going back to my freshman year. He took 2 steps closer. Over you. Over all of them, she said. There are 11 statements, Travis. 11 people who your family's lawyers have been quietly trying to talk out of existing. You think this is about me? You started it. You started it, she said. In a gymnasium full of witnesses and cameras, I just refuse to be the version of it that goes away quietly. He said something to the boy on his left, low directed, and the boy moved to her right. She tracked him. The 4th boy stayed behind Travis. Her phone was in her bag on the chair's side pocket. She calculated the time it would take to reach it against the distance between her and the nearest elevator. Neither number was good. You want an apology? She said, keeping her voice level, keeping her eyes moving. Travis, the boy to the right, the one behind. You want me to withdraw from the case? Tell my lawyers to stand down. Let your family's version of events become the version everyone accepts. She paused. You drove here tonight and brought 3 friends because you think I'm easier to handle without an audience. You're in a wheelchair, Travis said, and said it the way you say a word when you mean it to be final. Yes, she said. I am. Her hand had already moved to the side pocket of her chair. Travis crossed the distance before she reached the phone. His hand came down on her wrist, not the punch, not the grab she'd been expecting, but a controlling grip, weight behind it, pressing her hand away from the bag. His friends closed in on either side. Hey, the voice came from the far end of the lane. Rowan Voss was standing 40 feet away. He'd parked on level 3 because he'd been in the area. He'd texted her that 40 minutes ago, that he was nearby if she needed a ride back, that Patrick had said he was running behind. She'd told him she was fine. She'd told him she didn't need it. She had not expected to be grateful she'd been wrong. Rowan was still 40 feet away, but he was already moving, and the particular quality of his movement, that absence of wasted acceleration, the specific economy, registered on the boys around her before it registered consciously. The heavy-set one on her left took a half-step back. The one to her right turned to face him. Then he looked at Eli. She hadn't seen Eli. He'd been behind Rowan at the elevator, and now he was standing exactly where Rowan had left him beside the concrete pillar, one hand on it, watching. Rowan said something to him without turning. Eli nodded. He stayed. Then Rowan covered the remaining 30 feet. The boy to her right moved first, a wild, swinging punch that had commitment but no technique. Rowan wasn't where the punch arrived. He'd angled left, let the arm go past, and his response was not a counterpunch, but a redirect. He caught the boy's arm mid-swing and used the momentum to walk him into the concrete pillar to the right. Controlled enough that the contact was jarring without being injury level. The boy sat down on the ground and stayed there. The heavy-set boy on the left came in lower, grabbing for Rowan's jacket. Rowan dropped his weight, broke the grip with an upward rotation of both forearms, and used his own pivot to put the boy off balance and walk him backward into the side panel of a parked SUV. The sound of it was loud in the concrete space. The boy's hands came up. The 4th boy, the one Celeste didn't know, looked at the 2 on the ground and the one leaning against the SUV and made a decision. He took 4 steps backward and stopped moving. Travis still had her wrist. He'd watched the 20-second sequence with the expression of someone watching a demonstration of physics they'd been told was impossible. His grip on her wrist hadn't loosened. It had tightened, reflexive, the way hands tighten when the surrounding situation has become unfamiliar, and the thing they're holding is the only stable variable. Rowan stopped 2 feet in front of Travis. He said nothing. He just looked at him. Travis looked back. His chest was moving. "Let go of her wrist," Rowan said. "You can't." Travis started. "I've already done it once," Rowan said, with a flatness that was not theatrical. Not a threat exactly. More like a statement of available geometry. "You know what happens if you don't let go. Let go." Travis's hand released. Celeste pulled her arm back. She flexed her fingers. The grip had been hard enough to leave a line of pressure across the inside of her wrist that would probably bruise. Travis was breathing through his nose. His eyes were moving between Rowan and his friends, the boy sitting against the pillar, the one still leaning on the SUV. The fourth one who'd stepped back. "This is assault," Travis said. Again. "You keep touching." "I redirected 2 people who were attacking me," Rowan said. He hadn't raised his voice. "The cameras on level 3 of this structure have been running the entire time we've been standing here. I noticed them when I parked." He paused. "Did you check the cameras before you chose this level?" Travis's jaw moved. "Here's what happens now," Rowan said. "You and your friends are going to walk back to the elevator. You're going to leave this building. And you're going to call whoever in your family still answers your calls and tell them what you just did. Because whatever legal exposure your family was managing before tonight just changed significantly. You don't know what you're talking about." "Your hand was on her wrist," Rowan said. "On camera. After 11 weeks of documented pattern. After your family's attorneys have been conducting witness intimidation that my lawyer has already presented to a judge." He took 1 step to the left, not toward Travis, just to align himself more directly between Travis and Celeste. "You came here tonight to scare her in silence. You came because you've always been able to do that: find someone alone, apply enough pressure, and watch them calculate that it's safer to disappear." His voice remained completely level. "She didn't disappear after the gymnasium. She's not going to disappear after a parking garage." Travis stared at him. Something happened in his face, a fracture, small under the surface. Not remorse. Not yet. But the specific crack that forms when a person who has never encountered a wall finally encounters one. "She ruined everything," he said, and the voice was younger than his face. "Everything was fine. Everything was fine for you," Rowan said. "Not for the girl in the soccer parking lot. Not for the kid who filed a report in October and watched it disappear. Not for the 11 people who said something happened and got told it didn't." He stopped. "Nothing was fine, Travis. It was just quiet. And quiet isn't the same thing." Silence in the concrete space. The ambient hum of the structure ventilation. Distant traffic. Travis's friends had regrouped behind him, not advancing, just gathered. The one who'd hung back was now standing to Travis's left. Travis looked at Celeste for a long moment. She looked back at him. She didn't look away. She had learned to not look away. He left. All 4 of them. The elevator sound came, and then the doors, and then the level was quiet, except for the ventilation hum, and Rowan's measured breathing, and Celeste sitting in her chair with her wrist across her lap. Rowan came to her side and crouched down. Same posture as the gymnasium. "Eye level. Can I see?" he said, nodding at her wrist. She held it out. He looked at it without touching the red pressure line across the inside, already starting to deepen at the edges. "Going to bruise," he said. "I know. You should photograph it." "I know that too." She already had her phone out. She took 3 photos in the parking garage light. Not the best quality, but sufficient. He watched her do it without comment. He didn't tell her she should have let Patrick drive her to the elevator door. He didn't tell her she shouldn't have been on level 3 alone. She appreciated that, not the way you appreciate someone sparing you a lecture you know you deserve, but the way you appreciate someone who understands that what happened had not been the result of a mistake she'd made. "Your son is standing by the elevator," she said. "He's fine," Rowan said. "He's seen me handle things before." A pause. "Not exactly this, but things." "You need to go to him. In a minute." He looked at her. "You're okay?" "Getting there," she said, and recognized it as the same thing she'd said to him in the gymnasium, and recognized from the small shift in his expression that he recognized it too. "We should call Adrian," he said. "I already texted her." She held up her phone briefly. "I texted her when Travis was 40 feet away and walking toward me. Before he reached my chair." She paused. "I've gotten better at timing." Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the category. He stood, looked at the cameras mounted at the near corner of the ceiling visible, standard parking structure installation. You said you noticed the cameras when you parked, she said. Yes. Travis didn't check, no, because he thought he was choosing a space for its isolation. He was looking down. She looked at the same camera. You looked up habit, he said. She nodded slowly. She was still looking at the camera. Rowan, she said. Yeah, what you said to him. At the end. She turned her chair to face him. About quiet not being the same as fine. It's true. I know it's true, she said. I spent 4 years after my accident being what people described as strong. What they meant was I didn't cause disruption. I didn't make them uncomfortable with what had changed. I was quiet. She paused. I was very, very quiet. He looked at her with the particular attention he gave to things he was trying to understand completely before he responded to them. And now you're not, he said. Getting less quiet, she said. He was still looking at her when the sound of small running footsteps crossed the concrete from the elevator. Eli, no longer able to stay at the pillar, arriving at Rowan's side and immediately turning to check on Celeste with the serious brown eyes. Is she okay? Eli asked his father. Yes, Rowan said. Are you okay? Eli asked Celeste directly, bypassing parental intermediation. I'm okay, she said, and this time meant it more specifically. There were 4 of them, Eli said, with the matter-of-fact accounting of a child who had been watching carefully from 40 feet away. I counted. You counted, she said. Dad says you should always know the numbers. He looked up at Rowan. Right? Right, Rowan said. She looked at the 2 of them, the man with his hands at his sides and the boy at his elbow, both of them watching her with the same quality of attention. Slightly different in the specific way, fathers and sons reflect each other without being copies. She felt something that was not comfortable and was not sad and was not simple enough to name in the moment, sitting in a concrete parking structure under fluorescent lights with her wrist bruising and her phone warm in her hand. Adrian called back 11 minutes later. She absorbed the information with the rapid, compressed efficiency of a lawyer, recalibrating in real-time camera documentation. 4 witnesses, including a minor physical contact resulting in a bruise, prior pattern of behavior, and now this, which was no longer a civil matter with criminal adjacencies, but something more direct. I'm contacting the DA's office in the morning, Adrian said. I want police on record tonight. Call them. Get a report number. Do not wait. Rowan had already looked up the non-emergency number while Adrian was talking. He handed Celeste his phone, the number already dialed, ready to connect. She looked at him holding out the phone. She took it. The police arrived in 22 minutes. 2 officers, one who took her statement with the practiced neutrality of someone who wrote a lot of reports, and one who kept looking at Rowan with the specific expression of someone trying to figure out what they were looking at. Rowan answered his questions in the same economy he used for everything. He did not mention his service. He described his actions accurately, specifically, and without flourish. The officer taking notes wrote something down and then looked up. You subdued 3 people, he said, without significant injury to any of them. Yes, Rowan said. How? A pause. Training. What kind of training? The kind that doesn't require me to hurt someone to stop them, Rowan said. And then, because the officer was clearly waiting for something more specific, I was in the Navy. The officer looked at him for a moment, wrote something. Eli had fallen asleep in the back of Rowan's truck during the 20 minutes they'd waited for police. Celeste had seen him from across the lot through the rear window, curled on his side with his jacket balled under his head, entirely unconscious in the way only small children manage to be in inconvenient places. Patrick arrived and stood beside Celeste's car with the carefully neutral expression of a man choosing not to have opinions about what had clearly been a significant evening. When the police finally cleared them, report filed, contact information exchanged, case number given, Rowan walked her to the car. He didn't offer to push her chair. She'd noticed over the last 2 weeks that he never did not without being asked, not reflexively, the way most people reached for her handles before she'd registered they were there. He walked beside her. She wheeled herself. The gap between them was about 3 feet. At the car, Patrick held the door. She stopped before getting in. Thank you, she said, for being nearby. Coincidence, he said. Was it? He was quiet for a moment. Patrick mentioned he was running behind, he said carefully. And I knew which level you used. She looked at him. I wasn't going to say anything unless something happened, he said. You don't need someone. I wasn't trying to. He stopped. Started again. You have the right to get to your own car. I do, she said. I just Rowan. She said it steadily. I know. He stopped talking. He looked at her in the parking structure light, which was not a forgiving light, not the kind that made anything softer, just flat and accurate. Go get your son, she said. He nodded, one of his minimal nods. She got into the car. Patrick closed the door. As the car turned out of the level, she looked back through the rear window. Rowan was walking toward his truck. At the same moment, as if the movement of the car had been a signal, she saw Eli's face appear in Rowan's rear window, awake now, watching her car, lifting one hand in a small wave. She raised her hand. She wasn't sure if he could see it. She raised it anyway. Adrian's call to the district attorney's office the following morning set in motion a process that was procedurally different from everything that had come before, slower in some ways, faster in others, and heavier with the weight of official consequence rather than civil positioning. The parking garage footage was retrieved that day by law enforcement, which meant it was no longer subject to Kessler family intervention. The four boys were identified from Travis's social media by the afternoon. Gerald Kessler's office issued a brief statement, 3 sentences. No press appearance this time, expressing concern for all parties and confidence in the justice system. His media consultant had apparently decided that the polished charcoal suit presentation was no longer the appropriate tool. Celeste read the statement at her desk and put her phone face down. The bruise on her wrist had developed fully overnight, a band of blue-green across the inside, visible below her sleeve when she reached for anything. She didn't cover it. She wore the shirt with the 3/4 sleeves, and she let the bruise be there, because she had spent 4 years making herself presentable for rooms that wanted to pretend she was fine, and she was done with a certain variety of that effort. At 2 in the afternoon, Adrian sent a single-line text, judge-approved preservation order on all Westbridge admin records. Everything is locked. They can't touch it. Celeste read it twice. Set her phone down. Looked at the city through the window. At 3, Rowan texted, Eli wants to know if you like dinosaurs. This is not a casual question. Your answer will affect his opinion of you significantly. She looked at the text for a moment. Then she typed, tell him I've always been partial to the ankylosaur. Underrated. Heavily armored. Refuses to be knocked down. She sent it and went back to her quarterly review. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. He says, that's the correct answer. He also says the Triceratops is actually better, but he respects your choice. She read it twice. Something happened in her chest again, the same small, specific thing that had happened when Rowan told her Eli had asked about her. She sat with it for a moment, not analyzing it, not filing it anywhere, just letting it be there. Then her phone buzzed again. He's right about the Triceratops, for the record. She typed, don't tell him I said this, but he's probably right. Rowan's response took 40 seconds. She imagined him reading it at a job site, in work gloves, squinting at the screen. He's always right, Rowan wrote back. It's exhausting. She was smiling, actually smiling. Not the neighborhood of it, when Maya knocked and opened the door. Maya looked at her. The expression on Celeste's face was apparently worth noting, because Maya's eyebrows moved slightly before she composed herself back to professional neutral. The DA's office confirmed they've retrieved the parking structure footage, Maya said. All of it, 6 hours of continuous recording. Good, Celeste said. And the school district's independent review committee has scheduled their first session for next Thursday. Good, Maya hesitated. How's your wrist? Celeste glanced at it. The bruise was still there, vivid and factual. Still attached, she said. That's the bar we're working with? Some days Celeste said yes. Maya almost smiled, left the doorway, closed the door. Celeste turned back to her window. The city was doing its afternoon thing, the light coming in at the angle that hit the glass towers across the street and bounced sideways in long sheets. She thought about Rowan standing in the parking structure, saying quiet isn't the same as fine. She thought about 11 people who had said something happened and been told it hadn't. She thought about Travis's face in that last moment, the fracture under the surface, the voice that had gone younger than his face. She thought about what it would cost him to actually become accountable, and whether anyone in his life was capable of helping him do that, and found herself holding both the anger and the complicated question of it at the same time, which she thought was probably the correct way to hold it. Her phone was still warm from the text conversation. She picked it up, looked at the last exchange. He's always right. It's exhausting. She set it back down, got back to work. Outside, 5 floors below street level, in a courthouse records office, a clerk was logging the Westbridge Academy administrative files into a system that meant they couldn't be touched, amended, or quietly lost. The structure was holding. The cracks were spreading in the direction that meant something. And in a parking garage on level 3 of the Meridian's center, a security camera that Travis Kessler had not looked up to find was still recording patient, indifferent, and entirely without mercy exactly what it had seen. The district attorney's office moved with the particular speed that institutions produce when the evidence is unambiguous, and the political cost of delay has become higher than the political cost of action. The parking garage footage was clear. The sequence was clear. The bruise on Celeste's wrist was documented, photographed, and entered into a file that now carried a case number. Travis Kessler was charged with misdemeanor assault and criminal threatening charges that carried real consequences for a 17-year-old, though not the kind that would define the rest of his life unless he made additional choices in that direction. His 3 companions were charged separately, 2 with misdemeanor assault, and 1 the boy who had stepped back with nothing, which was its own kind of outcome. A record of the moment a teenager had done, the minimum required to stay on the right side of something. Gerald Kessler's attorneys issued a statement within 6 hours of the charges being filed. This one was 4 paragraphs and said less than the previous ones, while using more words to say it, which Adrian described as a reliable indicator that the family's legal strategy had shifted from offense to damage control. Gerald himself made no public appearance. The independent administrative review at Westbridge Academy opened its first formal session on a Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon had requested the employment records of the principal, the director of student affairs, still officially on medical leave, and 2 additional administrators whose names had appeared in the buried complaint documentation. The school board convened an emergency session. 3 members who had served during the years of suppressed complaints retained personal legal counsel, which told you everything you needed to know about what they expected the review to find. Celeste watched all of it from a particular distance involved enough to be useful, far enough back that she could see the shape of it. Adrian was in the middle of it daily. Rowan checked in every 2 or 3 days, which was the frequency she'd come to understand as his natural rhythm present, without hovering attentive, without performing attention. "How's the wrist?" he asked, on the Thursday after the charges. "Healed," she said. Mostly. The bruise is still there. Fading. A pause. "I've started wearing shorter sleeves." He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. She understood what he meant by it. Not that the bruise was good, but that she was letting it be visible, that the instinct she'd had in the office to not cover it, to let it be there and be factual, was the correct instinct. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't need him to. The legal proceedings occupied the next 3 weeks, with the grinding procedural rhythm of official processes, hearings, filings, response deadlines, continuances that served one party and frustrated the other. Rowan's formal involvement as a witness meant that his military background eventually entered the record in a limited but specific way. The DA's office, building their account of the parking garage confrontation, needed to explain how one man had effectively neutralized 3 attackers without causing injury, and the answer, once introduced, changed the tenor of the Kessler attorneys' remaining arguments in ways they hadn't anticipated. The narrative the Kessler side had constructed dangerous stranger, violent escalation. Their client as victim required Rowan to be someone who'd acted from aggression. What the record showed instead was a man with verified advanced training in controlled engagement who had, by every measurable indicator, used the minimum force required and stopped precisely there. The DA's expert witness described it in terms Celeste found she needed to hear twice to fully absorb. The absence of injury to the 3 individuals is not incidental to Mr. Voss's actions, it is the result of them. She told Rowan what the expert had said on one of their regular calls. He said. "That's your response? It's accurate," he said. "I'm not sure what else to say about it." "Nothing," she said. "You don't have to say anything about it." A pause. "It was a long time ago. The training. Sometimes I think I've lost most of it. A beat." Apparently not, she agreed. She waited to see if he'd say more. He didn't, and she didn't push. She'd learned the difference between his silences that wanted following and his silences that wanted to be left exactly where they were. Travis Kessler entered a plea agreement 6 weeks after the charges were filed. The specifics were not disclosed in detail, but what became publicly known was sufficient: mandatory participation in a structured accountability program, community service, a formal school transfer that took him out of the Westbridge district entirely, and a period of supervised probation with conditions that included no contact, direct or indirect, with Celeste, Rowan, or any of the 11 individuals who had filed statements. The Westbridge Academy Administrative Review concluded 7 weeks after it began. The Director of Student Affairs did not return from medical leave. His resignation was announced quietly, a Friday afternoon news cycle, the specific timing chosen to reduce visibility. The principal received a formal censure and remained in her position on probationary terms that would, Adrian told Celeste privately, make her tenure effectively untenable within the year. 2 board members who had been in direct receipt of suppressed complaint documentation resigned before the review published its final report. The report itself was 41 pages. Celeste read all of it. It was thorough in the way that institutional reports are thorough when the people writing them understand that the document will be read by people who know how to find what's been left out. It documented the pattern. It named the mechanisms, the administrative processes that had been used to receive complaints, generate paperwork, and then route that paperwork to nowhere. It used the word systemic 7 times, which was 7 more times than the school board had probably hoped for. She was sitting with the report on her screen and a cup of coffee that had gone cold somewhere during page 28 when her phone rang. Not Rowan Maya. 3 other schools in the district, Maya said, without preamble. Their parent organizations have contacted Adrian's office in the last week. Separate situations, different specifics, same underlying pattern. Celeste closed the report. Same underlying system, she said. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. She'd known it was coming, had known really, from the moment the 4th and 5th and 6th statements had arrived at Adrian's office, that what had happened at Westbridge was not a localized aberration, but a particular symptom. Celeste had built a company by understanding that isolated problems were rarely isolated. You find one structural failure, you look at the structure. Set up the meetings, she said. With Adrian? With Adrian and with me, she said. I want to hear from the families directly. Maya was quiet for half a second, the half second that was her telling Celeste that this would significantly expand their involvement and the time it required, without saying that in words, because she understood Celeste's answer to that observation before she made it. I'll schedule it, Maya said. The meetings happened over 2 weeks, 7 families, 3 different schools, a conference room at Adrian's firm that felt different when it had parents sitting in it rather than legal teams. Celeste listened. She asked questions that were about understanding rather than information gathering, which was a distinction she'd learned the hard way in a decade of boardrooms. She took notes by hand, which she'd started doing the year after the accident, because typing required a posture that sometimes caused her back problems she didn't discuss publicly, and the handwriting gave her something to look at while she thought. What emerged from the 7 meetings was a picture she'd expected in outline, but not in detail. The detail was harder than the outline. A 14-year-old girl who had reported being cornered in a stairwell and watched the report sit in an administrative inbox for 4 months before being formally closed with the notation insufficient evidence. A boy with a learning difference who had been systematically excluded from group activities by a peer with significant family connections to the school's athletics program, whose parents had filed 3 separate complaints and been told each time that the situation was being monitored. A 12-year-old who had stopped attending school, entirely home instruction, a note from a therapist, the kind of solution that solves the immediate problem by removing the child because the situation had never been addressed and the family had eventually run out of other options. She drove home on the last evening of the 2nd week, Patrick quiet in the front, the city moving, and sat with all of it. Not organizing it into a plan, not converting it into action items. Just sitting with it the way you sit with something that is heavy and real and belongs to you now, because you've been told it and cannot unknow it. She called Rowan. 7 families, she said when he picked up. Maya told me you'd been meeting with them, he said. Did she? She texts me sometimes to keep me up to date. A pause. I hope that's okay. Yes, Celeste said, and found that she meant it without any complication. 7 families, 3 schools. The same structures that made Travis possible made all of these situations possible. The same mechanisms. I know, he said. I want to do something about it. I know that too, he said. I mean something structural. Not just the legal remedy for these specific cases, but something that actually changes the conditions that produced them. She was watching the city through the window. I've been thinking about what you said at the garage. About quiet not being the same as fine. These families have been quiet for years. Not because they wanted to be, but because the system was designed to make silence the path of least resistance. He was quiet himself for a moment. What are you thinking? He said. I'm thinking about what you said when all of this was resolved, or when you said you'd want to, eventually, about teaching. Situational awareness, self-defense, the practical things. I mentioned that, yeah. I want to build something around it, Net, she said. Not a charity program that gets funded for 2 years and then loses its grant. Something with actual infrastructure. A center community base that teaches what you're describing, but also provides advocacy resources for families navigating institutional complaint processes. What to do when you report something and nothing happens. How to document, how to escalate, how to not be quiet. The silence this time was longer than usual. That's a significant undertaking, he said finally. Yes, and you're asking me to be involved. I'm asking whether you want to be, she said. There's a difference. She heard him exhale, not the pressure valve, something slower. Considering. I don't know anything about running a program like that, he said. You know everything that matters about the core of it, she said. The practical skills, the people side of it, how to read a situation before it becomes a crisis. I know the institutional side, the funding, the structure, the board governance. A pause. We don't have to know the same things. That's actually how it should work. Another pause. Longer. Can I think about it, he said. Yes. A week, take 2, she said. I'm not in a hurry to get this wrong. He called back in 4 days. Yes, he said, without setup. But I have conditions. Tell me. It's community governed. Not corporate funded in a way that means corporate directed. I want the families who come to us to have real input in what we offer them. Agreed. I'm not a spokesperson. I'll teach, I'll develop curriculum, I'll talk to families directly. I won't do press conferences. I'll handle press, she said. You handle people. That works. A pause. And the self-defense component I wanted adapted. Not just standard technique. It needs to work for everyone who walks through the door. Or roles. He said the last word deliberately, not with awkwardness, just specifically. She recognized what he was doing. She'd known for weeks, in some peripheral way, that this was coming, this conversation, this specific offer, and she'd let it live at the edge of her awareness without examining it directly, because examining it directly would have required her to decide how she felt about needing it. You're talking about an adaptive program, she said. Yes, for people with physical disabilities, among others, he said. But yes, specifically, a beat. I've been looking at existing programs. There are some. None of them are great. Most of them are designed by people who've never sat in a chair and tried to figure out how to create distance from someone twice their size. How long have you been looking at existing programs? She asked. A pause, a while, he said. She sat with that. Okay, she said. Okay, you'll do the adaptive component? Okay, I'll do the adaptive component, she said. And Rowan, she stopped. Started again. I'm aware that you've been thinking about this for longer than I have. About what it would mean for me specifically. I want you to know I see that. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. I want to. There's a difference. He was quiet. You're going to start quoting me back to myself, he said. Only when you're right. The thing that happened on his end was unmistakably a laugh this time. Brief, real. A sound she'd heard only a few times and recognized as different from his near logs in the way that the real thing is always different from the approximation. The Voss Hawthorne Community Training Center was incorporated 4 months later. The name had been Eli's suggestion, delivered at Rowan's kitchen table on a Sunday evening when they'd been going through the paperwork, and Eli had been at the same table doing something with a book about prehistoric ocean creatures, mostly ignoring the adult conversation until the moment he hadn't. Why don't you just call it yours? Eli had said, looking up from the book. Whose? Rowan asked. Both of yours, Eli said, with the simplicity of someone stating a fact available to anyone who is paying attention. Since you're both doing it. Rowan had looked at Celeste. Celeste had looked at the paperwork. Voss Hawthorne, she said. Or Hawthorne Voss, Rowan said. Alphabetical, she said. Voss comes first alphabetically. She opened her mouth, closed it. He was right. Fine, she said. You could also flip a coin, Eli offered. We're going alphabetical, Celeste said. Eli went back to his book. The center opened in a converted warehouse space in the Dunmore district, close enough to Westbridge Academy to be deliberate, far enough from Celeste's corporate world to be its own thing. The conversion had taken 3 months and had not gone smoothly, because conversions of 50-year-old warehouse spaces never go smoothly. And Rowan had spent a significant portion of those 3 months in the building, doing construction work he wasn't being paid for, which Celeste had argued with him about twice, and then stopped arguing about, because he was going to do it regardless, and the building looked significantly better for it. The space was designed from the beginning to be fully navigable by wheelchair, which had required more thought than most architects brought to the problem by default. Wide turning radii, no raised platforms, equipment that could be adjusted for seated use. Rowan had worked with an adaptive sports consultant who'd spent 20 years figuring out what the standard fitness and self-defense industries persistently failed to figure out, that a space designed as an afterthought for people in chairs is. Experienced as an afterthought by people in chairs, and that this experience has consequences for whether they come back. Celeste had been involved in the adaptive curriculum from the beginning, which she had agreed to with the particular caution of a person who was not accustomed to being on the receiving end of instruction. She knew, intellectually, that what Rowan was developing would require her to demonstrate the techniques to actually practice them, be corrected, try again, fail at some things, improve at others, in the specific and unglamorous way that real skills are acquired. The first session happened on a Tuesday afternoon, in the training room, 6 weeks before the center's public opening. Just her and Rowan. The overhead lights too bright in the way of spaces, not quite finished yet. A mat area adapted from standard wrestling mats, modified at the edges for wheelchair access. We start with awareness, Rowan said. He was standing in the center of the mat. She was beside him in her chair. Not technique. Before any physical skill is useful, you need to understand how you read a space. I already read spaces, she said. I've been doing it for 4 years. For accessibility, he said. That's different. You're reading for ramps, for door widths, for elevator locations. What I'm teaching you is to read for position. Where people are relative to you, what the exits look like from where you are, where the ground is uneven, where there are objects you can use to create distance. She thought about the parking garage. She'd chosen level 3 for lighting and elevator access. She hadn't looked at the cameras. Okay, she said. Tell me what you see in this room right now, he said. Not what you expected to see, what you actually see. She looked, actually looked, the way she gave reports her complete attention, not skimming for the expected information, but reading for the things she hadn't anticipated. 2 doors, she said. Main entrance behind me, I'd have to turn and cross the full mat to reach it. The side door to the right is closer, but I'd have to pass you to get there. A pause. The equipment rack along the left wall is on wheels, which I hadn't noticed before. There's a 3-inch height change between the mat edge and the floor manageable, but something I'd need to account for at speed. She stopped. The ceiling light directly above me has a loose mounting. I can hear the vibration. Rowan looked at the ceiling. Back at her. You noticed the light, he said. The sound, she said. It's slightly off from the others. He nodded once. The particular nod she'd come to understand meant she'd done something correctly. Good start, he said. The sessions happened twice a week after that. They were not easy, which she'd expected. They were harder than she'd expected in ways she hadn't anticipated, not the physical difficulty, but the statistic comfort of learning in the presence of another person, of being wrong in front of someone, of attempting a wrist release 3 times and getting the mechanics wrong in the same place, each time, because her left shoulder had developed a compensation pattern from years of using it differently on one side than the other. And Rowan noticed it on the 3rd attempt and adjusted her starting position by 2 inches without comment, and she'd had to breathe through the particular frustration of needing the adjustment. You're not failing, he said, after the 4th session, when she'd gotten The break and clear sequence, right once and wrong twice, and he'd called it for the evening. I know, she said. You're learning. I said I know. You had the face, he said. She looked at him. The face you make when you think you should have gotten something by now, he said. You do it in meetings, too. When someone explains something that took longer than you'd allocated for explanation. She opened her mouth, closed it. Maya noticed it first, he said. She mentioned it. Maya talks to you too much, she said. She's helpful, he said. She's a traitor, she said, and then, hearing herself, I'm not actually angry. You hate being slow at things. I hate being slow at things, she agreed. Everybody's slow at things, he said. The relevant question is whether you keep going anyway. She looked at him. He was standing at the equipment rack, writing something in the curriculum notebook he'd started keeping handwritten, not digital, which she'd initially considered an inefficiency and had come to understand was deliberate. There was something in the act of handwriting that he was using as part of the process, not just to record it. You hate being slow at things too, she said. He didn't look up from the notebook. Yeah, what are you slow at? A pause. He finished the line he was writing. Letting things be good, he said. He said it the way he said things that were true and slightly difficult without ornament, without looking to see how it landed. Something good happens, and I start waiting for what's going to go wrong with it. She was quiet. Nora used to call it my Doom Patrol instinct, he said. He almost never said her name. He said it the same way he said everything level accurate, but she noticed the small effort in the levelness. She said I was always doing reconnaissance on my own happiness. Is she right? Was, he corrected quietly, and then yes. She was right. Celeste held that. I do something similar, she said. Not waiting for things to go wrong. More I reduce the surface area of things that matter. The fewer things you let matter, the less there is to lose. He looked at her now. Smaller life, she said, more controlled. I told myself it was efficiency. It's not efficiency. No, she said, it's not. The training room was quiet. The loose ceiling light made its barely audible vibration above them. Outside, through the walls, the street was doing its afternoon thing, the ordinary city sounds that form the background of everything. We're both bad at this, she said. At what? At letting things be good, she said. At not reducing the surface area. He looked at her for a moment. Getting better, he said. Are we slowly, he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required. Slowly's okay, she said. He nodded, went back to the notebook. She wheeled to the side of the mat and began her cool-down stretches, a routine she'd built from physical therapy years ago and maintained with the discipline she applied to everything she wanted to keep. The center's opening was not a press event, which had been Rowan's condition, and which Celeste had honored without real resistance, because she'd understood why. The community around it, the families who'd been involved since the beginning, the parents from the 3 schools, the individuals who'd reached out through the network the complaint process had built around itself. Those were the people whose presence mattered on opening day. And a press event would have made those people the backdrop to a story about Celeste Hawthorne and Rowan Voss, which was the opposite of the point. They had 80 people through the door on the first day. Not 80 in a single session. 80 total morning tours, afternoon orientation sessions, 2 demonstration classes. Families with children. Adults who had heard through community channels. 3 people in wheelchairs, 1 with a walker, 1 with a cane. A woman who had driven 40 minutes from outside the district because she'd read about the program through one of the parent networks. Rowan ran the first demonstration class. Celeste had insisted on being a student, not a facilitator. She sat in the middle of the group on the mat, 8 other people around her, and went through the beginning awareness exercises that had started her own sessions. And she was wrong about 2 things and right about 4, which was a percentage she'd learned to be honest with herself about. Afterward, a woman named Dolores, mid-60s, who used a cane following a knee replacement, who had come because her daughter had been one of the families Celeste met in the conference room, found Celeste by the equipment rack. My daughter said, you listened, Dolores said. When you met with the families. She said you actually listened. I tried to, Celeste said. Most people with your kind of money and position listen to the shape of a thing, Dolores said. They hear the outline, and then they hear themselves responding to it. She said you listened to the actual words. Celeste thought about the 7 families. The 14-year-old, the 12-year-old who'd stopped attending school. The three filed complaints that became 3 pieces of paper in a process designed to produce paper rather than remedy. I had some experience with not being heard, Celeste said. I know what it feels like to be in a room where people are watching rather than helping. Dolores looked at her steadily. She had the particular directness of women who've spent decades not having time for anything that wasn't real. Good, she said. Hold on to that, because when you get busy and successful with this place, which you will. She tapped her cane against the floor once. It'll be easy to forget. I'll forget other things first, Celeste said. What things? Most things, she said honestly. The wrist bruise is already mostly gone. I'll forget the physical specifics, but the feeling in that parking garage of being surrounded, of not being able to move, she paused. That one I expect to keep, Dolores nodded slowly. Good, she said again. Eli came to the center on weekends, which had become its own kind of institution within the institution. He did homework at the front desk when Rowan was running sessions. He had developed strong opinions about which water bottles were correctly positioned in the equipment area and had reorganized them once without asking, which Rowan had been informed of after the fact and had chosen not to address directly, possibly because the reorganization was actually an improvement. He also talked to everyone. It was his most consistent characteristic, the willingness to simply begin conversations with strangers without requiring any particular catalyst. He talked to the woman with the walker. He talked to the teenage boys who came in on Saturday afternoons for the situational awareness sessions. He talked to Celeste, always, the moment she arrived, with the same complete attention he'd given her since the water bottle in the gymnasium. One Saturday in November, about 8 weeks after the center opened, he was sitting beside her in the observation area while Rowan ran an afternoon session, and he said, without looking up from the book, "Are you and my dad going to get married?" Celeste looked at him. He looked up, completely matter-of-fact. The serious brown eyes. "That's a direct question," she said. "Dad says if you're going to ask something, you should just ask it," Eli said, instead of going around it. "Your dad is right," she said. "It's also possible to ask a question that's more complicated than it looks." Is that what that was? Yes. He thought about this. Considered it with the genuine deliberation he gave to things he wanted to understand correctly. "Okay," he said, "but do you want to?" She looked at this 7-year-old with his book about prehistoric ocean creatures and his strong opinions about water bottle organization and his complete fearlessness was about the things that most adults spent considerable energy avoiding. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I don't not want to." He processed this. His brow furrowed in the specific way it furrowed when something required additional parsing. "That's kind of the same thing," he said finally. "It's a step toward the same thing," she said. He seemed to find this satisfactory. He went back to his book. She went back to watching Rowan in the training room, visible through the glass observation panel, moving through a demonstration with 4 students arranged in a semicircle, patient and precise, in the way he was always patient and precise. The way that was not performance, but simply how he did things. He looked up once through the glass, not at the session at her. She held his gaze for a moment. He went back to the demonstration. She sat in this observation area beside his son, who was reading about prehistoric oceans, and she thought about reducing the surface area of things, and about reconnaissance on your own happiness, and about how 2 people who had each, in their separate and entirely different ways, learned to make themselves small enough to be safe, might learn slowly, imperfectly, without any guarantee to take up a little more space. The ceiling in the training room, she noticed through the glass, was solid. No loose fittings, no vibration. Rowan had fixed it during the renovation, 3 weeks before anyone else would have thought to. She hadn't mentioned that she'd noticed. She was noticing it now. Some things she was learning didn't require narrating. Some things could simply be true and present, and enough the fixed ceiling, the water bottles reorganized by a 7-year-old, the man on the other side of the glass who had walked through a set of gymnasium doors because the woman he didn't know couldn't get out. The session ended. Students filtered toward the equipment rack. Rowan crossed to the observation panel door and opened it, bringing with him the particular temperature of a room where people have been working. "Good group today," he said. "I watched," she said. "You had them doing the position exercise in pairs. The young woman on the left, she figured out the leverage point before you showed it to her. He turned to look back through the glass at the dispersing group, identifying who she meant. Yeah, he said. She did. A pause. I'm going to ask her if she wants to assist with Saturday juniors. She'll say yes, Celeste said. You don't know that. She stayed 20 minutes after the last session to practice on her own, Celeste said. I noticed. He looked at her. You were here 20 minutes after the last session, he said. I had paperwork. You were watching. I had paperwork, she said. He almost smiled. Eli looked up from his book. She was watching, he told his father helpfully. I know, Rowan said. Traitor, Celeste said to Eli. That's what you said about Maya, Eli said. I'm surrounded, she said. Neither of them disputed this, which was its own kind of answer to everything. The winter that followed was the kind that comes in sideways, not the dramatic postcard kind, with clean snowfall and still air, but the gray and grinding kind that settles over a city for weeks at a time and makes everything feel slightly more difficult than it should be. The kind of winter that reveals the character of things. Buildings that look solid in October show their drafts in January. People who manage fine in good conditions discover what they're actually made of when the conditions aren't. The Voss Hawthorne Community Training Center discovered that it was made of something reasonably durable, which surprised no one who had been paying attention and surprised Rowan considerably, because he was constitutionally suspicious of early success in the way that people become constitutionally suspicious of things they've wanted for a long time and then unexpectedly received. By February, 5 months after opening the center, had run 47 program sessions across 4 different curriculum tracks. The adaptive self-defense component had a waitlist. Not a long one, not the kind of waitlist that becomes a marketing talking point, but a real 114 people, most of them referred by occupational therapists or physical rehabilitation programs or, in 3 cases, by other participants who had gone home and told someone they knew. Word of mouth was the only advertising they'd done. Rowan had refused a featured story from a regional lifestyle magazine in December. Celeste had declined a speaking invitation that would have put the center's name in front of 10,000 attendees at a National Disability Advocacy Conference. Not because the conference wasn't worthwhile, but because she'd looked at the invitation and understood that saying yes was about her profile, not about the work. She was getting better at noticing the difference. The advocacy component, the part that helped families navigate institutional complaint processes, had handled 31 separate cases by the time February arrived. Of those, 22 had resulted in formal administrative action. 11 complaints that had been previously buried were reopened at 3 different schools, 4 district-level reviews had been initiated, and in 2 cases, families had been connected to legal representation that had produced concrete outcomes for children who had spent months being told that what was happening to them wasn't happening. Adrian Park sent Celeste a note in January, not an email, an actual handwritten note on her firm's letterhead, which was unusual enough that Celeste looked at it for a moment before opening it. It said, "What you've built is doing real work. I wanted to say it plainly." Celeste put the note in the top right drawer of her desk, which was where she kept things she wanted to be able to find again. The legal outcomes for Travis Kessler had resolved by December. His plea agreement held. He completed the first phase of the accountability program grudgingly, and with several documented incidents of resistance that Celeste heard about through Adrian and chose not to follow closely, because what happened to Travis from here was not her work to do. She had thought about this carefully in the months since the charges and had arrived at a position she was still slightly uncomfortable with, but believed was correct. Travis was 17, and 17-year-olds who have never been given real limits are products of systems as much as they are agents of their own choices. And whatever he became in the next decade would depend on whether anyone in his life was capable of telling him the truth rather than insulating him from it. She hoped someone was. She wasn't going to be that person. The boundary between accountability and rehabilitation was not hers to manage, and she understood that, and she tried to hold it without either rage or false magnanimity, because both of those were really about her and not about him. Gerald Kessler's influence in the district had contracted visibly. Not dramatically, money rarely disappears. Dramatically, it just redistributes, but the calls to contractor boards had stopped. The administrative walls had developed holes that couldn't be plastered over with donation announcements. and the family's name had acquired a particular weight in local conversations that Gerald would spend years trying to balance against with strategic philanthropy. Whether he succeeded was not something Celeste tracked. She had finite attention, and she had learned slowly and with difficulty to point it at things that moved. It was in the second week of February that Eli got sick. Not seriously a flu that circulated through his second-grade class, with the efficiency that only second-grade classes achieve, but sick enough that he missed 5 days of school and spent most of them on the couch in Rowan's apartment with a temperature that peaked at 102.6, a box of crackers, and increasingly strong opinions about which animated programs were worth his time and which were not. Celeste found out on the second day, when Rowan texted to say he'd need to cancel their Tuesday session, a note that was purely informational, no request attached to it, no implication that anything beyond information was being communicated. She texted back, "How bad?" "Rowan, he's okay, just miserable. Keeps trying to convince me the crackers are the problem and not the flu." She looked at this for a moment. Then she called Maya and rearranged her Tuesday afternoon. She arrived at Rowan's apartment at 2 o'clock with a container of soup from the Vietnamese place 3 blocks from her office, the kind with the thin rice noodles and the clear broth that was the only food she'd wanted for the first month after. Her accident, when her body was doing its miserable recalibration and everything else tasted like medicine. She didn't analyze the choice. She just brought the soup. Rowan opened the door with the slightly hollowed look of a parent who had been awake at irregular intervals for 2 nights and was running on the particular combination of love and stubbornness that keeps people functional past what should be possible. He looked at the soup. "You didn't have to," he started. "I know," she said. "Can I come in?" He stepped back. The apartment was exactly what she'd expected from everything she knew about him. Not bare, but undecorated in the way of a space where all the attention had gone into use rather than appearance. Functional furniture, clean surfaces, a kitchen that showed signs of actual cooking. A stack of Eli's books on the coffee table. A small framed photograph on the shelf near the door that she didn't look at directly because she understood it was private and she would see it when she was supposed to. Eli was on the couch under a blanket that had a pattern of small planets on it, looking approximately as miserable as advertised. He turned his head when she came in, and his expression shifted from the general wretchedness of illness to something more specific and slightly less wretched. "You brought soup," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Your dad said the crackers aren't working," she said. "The crackers are fine," Eli said, with the particular indignation of a child whose medical opinions are not being respected. "The crackers are not the problem. What is the problem?" "I feel terrible, and I've seen everything good on television already." "Everything," she said. "Everything worth seeing." She wheeled to the side of the couch, which required a brief navigation around the coffee table that she managed without incident. She looked at the stack of books, prehistoric ocean creatures, still present, 3 weeks after the training center observation deck. 2 others about animals. One with a red cover about a boy who finds something in a forest which looked well used. "Have you read these?" she said. "All of them." "All of them?" "The red one 3 times," he said. "It's the best one." Rowan appeared from the kitchen with a bowl and spoon. He'd heated the soup without being asked. She noted this without commenting on it. She stayed for 2 hours. She hadn't planned 2 hours. She'd planned 45 minutes, maybe an hour long enough to bring the soup and check on them both, without making the visit, something that required more energy than Rowan had available. But 45 minutes passed, and Eli was telling her about the plot of the Red Book, with the comprehensive attention to detail that children give to things they've loved 3 times over. And she was listening the way she listened to things she actually wanted to understand. And Rowan was sitting in the chair across from them, with his second cup of coffee, and occasionally adding a detail or a correction that Eli immediately disputed. And the apartment had the particular warmth of a space where nothing needed to be performed and nothing needed to be managed. At one point, Eli fell asleep mid-sentence, the abrupt, total unconsciousness of a sick child whose body had simply decided the conversation was over, and the apartment went quiet except for his breathing and the city sounds outside and the coffee cooling in Rowan's mug. Rowan looked at her across the sleeping child. "You didn't have to come," he said. Quietly, not to wake Eli. "I know," she said. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true," she said. "I didn't have to." "I wanted to." A pause. Those are different things. We've established this. He looked at her for a moment with the full attention he gave to things he was deciding about. Yeah, he said. We have. The apartment was quiet. Eli's breathing had the slow, even rhythm of real sleep. Outside, the winter city did its gray and grinding thing. Nora used to make soup when he was sick, Rowan said. He said it without setup, without the slight effortfulness she'd noticed before when her name came up, just said it, the way you say something when you've decided you're not going to work around it anymore. Not from scratch. She'd buy the base from the market and add things to it. He always thought she made it from nothing, which she never corrected him on. A pause. He figured it out when he was 5, I think. He didn't say anything about it. He just let it keep being true. Celeste looked at the sleeping boy. He's very kind, she said. For 7. For any age, Rowan said. Yes, she agreed. For any age. Rowan turned his mug in his hands. A habit she'd noticed when he was thinking about something that required care, he turned whatever he was holding. I've been thinking, he said. About what? About what Eli asked you. In November. He looked at her steadily, in the observation deck. She held his gaze. He told you, she said. He tells me everything, Rowan said. He can't help it. It's a reflex, a pause. He told me what you said. That you don't not want to. That's what I said. Is it still true? She looked at this man, the construction worker, hands, the face that had spent too much time outdoors, the particular stillness that was not coldness but density, the person who had walked through a set of gymnasium doors because someone he didn't know couldn't get out, who had fixed a ceiling fitting during a renovation before anyone else would have noticed it was loose, who had spent months quietly looking into adaptive self-defense programs for people in wheelchairs and not mentioned it until he had something to offer, who turned whatever he was holding when he was thinking carefully. Yes, she said, it's still true. He nodded, the minimal nod. The one that meant something had been settled. I'm not good at this, he said. I want to be honest about that. At what specifically? At the letting it be real part, he said. The Doom Patrol instinct. I catch myself looking for what's going to go wrong. He paused. With you, specifically. Not because I think something will. But because he stopped, tried again. Because it matters. And when things matter, I start watching them for cracks. I know, she said. I'm working on it. I know that too, she said. I'm working on the surface area problem. He almost smiled. How's that going? Slowly, she said. But you said slowly is okay. I said slowly's okay, he confirmed. Eli shifted on the couch without waking. His arm, which had been curled under the planet blanket, flopped outward towards Celeste's chair in the loose, slimmed way of sleeping children who have no relationship with spatial boundaries. His hand landed on her wheel rim. She looked at it. Didn't move away. Rowan watched her not move away. I know this is complicated, he said. What you'd be walking into. Eli and the schedule, and I don't have your life. The company, the profile. I own a truck and I run a training center and I make pasta on Tuesdays. You think those are problems, she said. I think they're relevant. Rowan, she said. I spend 10 hours a day in rooms where everything is about scale. Revenue numbers, growth projections, stakeholder expectations. I have spent 4 years being told, in various registers and by various people, that my life is impressive. She paused. Your apartment is the only place I've been in years, where nobody was impressed by me and I didn't miss it at all. He looked at her. The pasta on Tuesdays, she said. That's not a problem. That's actually the point. The month that followed was not a transformation. Neither of them was capable of transformation in the clean, sudden sense. They were both too much themselves for that, too shaped by the specific losses and decisions that had made them who they were. What happened was more like a gradual adjustment of the two things toward each other, the way structures settle when the foundation is real rather than assumed. They had dinners at Rowan's kitchen table, Celeste and Rowan and Eli, with homework and bad television, and Eli's sustained campaign to have a dog that Rowan deflected with the weary consistency of a man who knew he was eventually going to lose this particular argument. Celeste, for the record, was on Eli's side, which she communicated to Eli through careful nonverbal signals that Rowan was absolutely aware of and chose not to address directly, because he picked his battles, and the dog battle was one he wanted to control the timing of. She was at the apartment on a Friday night in early March when she noticed the photograph. She'd seen it before the small frame on the shelf near the door, but she'd respected its peripheralness the way she'd promised herself she would. This time she was reaching for her jacket, and her angle of approach brought her close enough that the photograph was simply in front of her, clearly, unavoidably. It was Rowan and a woman, outdoor light, both of them mid-law, about something that had happened just before the shutter. The woman was dark-haired and had Eli's eyes the same particular shape and seriousness, even mid-law. She had her hand on Rowan's arm in the way you touch someone when you're not thinking about the gesture, when it's just the natural position. Rowan came out of the kitchen and saw her looking. She looked at him. Not apologetically, she'd done nothing wrong but openly. She was funny, he said. He came to stand beside Celeste, looking at the photograph himself. The actual funniest person I've ever known. I don't say that to make a point. It's just the most true thing about her. A pause. She would have had opinions about everything we've done this year. The center of the case, all of it. Very loud opinions. Would she have approved? Celeste asked. He thought about it genuinely. Of the center, yes, he said. She'd have immediately tried to reorganize the equipment area, which now that I think about it, he glanced toward where Eli was in the other room. Is maybe where he gets that. And the rest of it, she said. Would she have approved of the rest? He looked at the photograph for another moment. She told me once, he said, that the worst thing she could imagine was me deciding that losing her meant I was done. She said it in the matter-of-fact way. She said things not as a deathbed speech, not dramatically. We were just having coffee, it came up. He paused. She said, if something happens to me, you don't get to use it as a reason to stop. I told her nothing was going to happen to her. He stopped. So, Celeste held that quietly. She sounds like someone who knew you well enough to anticipate your exact mistake, she said. Yes, he said. She was. He reached out and straightened the photograph. Slightly, it hadn't needed straightening, but it was something to do with his hands that wasn't turning a mug. I'm not asking you to be okay with her being present, he said. She's Eli's mother. She's going to be present. I'm not asking you to make her absent, Celeste said. She's part of who you both are. Making her absent would make you someone different, and I don't want someone different. She paused. I'm also not going to pretend it's simple. It's not simple. But simple was never something I was looking for. He looked at her. What were you looking for? He said. She thought about it honestly. I'm not sure I was looking, she said. I think I'd stopped looking. I'd gotten very efficient at not looking. She glanced at the photograph, the laughing woman, the laughing man who was also this man, 4 years, and a considerable amount of grief between those versions. And then you walked through a set of gymnasium doors and looked at me like I was just a person who needed a question answered. He was quiet. Can you breathe okay? She said. That was the question. It was the relevant question, he said. Yes, she said. It was. They got married on a Saturday in May, 14 months after the gymnasium. Not in a ceremony that made the news. They'd both been clear about that. And between Rowan's categorical refusal of anything that resembled a public event and Celeste's legal team's ability to make confidentiality agreements with event venues a routine part of contract language, they managed it. The community center. Late afternoon, when the light came through the training room windows at the angle that made the space look different from how it looked the rest of the day, warmer, the dust in the air catching the long horizontal light in a way that felt accidental and exactly right. 40 people. The families from the advocacy program, the ones who had come forward and stayed. Adrian Park, who wore a green blazer and cried, which surprised everyone, including Adrian. D. Reyes, who had driven from Portland, who shook Celeste's hand and held it for a moment and said, "He doesn't deserve you," which Rowan protested, and Reyes said, "That was a compliment to both of you," which Rowan then considered and accepted. Maya, who had organized every logistical detail with the suppressed efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this assignment for months and was going to execute it correctly or not sleep again. Eli wore a blue jacket the same color as the one he'd worn in the gymnasium, which Celeste noticed and said nothing about, because some things didn't need to be narrated, and stood beside his father with the formal seriousness of a child who understood that the occasion required gravitas and had come prepared to provide it. Before the ceremony, when Celeste was in the small office off the main hall, that they designated as a getting ready space, which was a generous description for a room with a folding mirror and a coat rack. Eli knocked on the door and came in without waiting for an answer, which was consistent with his general approach to doors. He looked at her for a moment. "You look nice," he said. "Thank you," she said. "You look very serious." "This is a serious thing," he said. "It is," she agreed. He came further into the room and stood beside her chair, which he'd been doing since November with the ease of someone who had decided the chair was simply part of the geography of being near Celeste. "I'm glad you're going to be there," he said. "Permanently." "There," she said. "Where?" "With us," he said, "in the apartment." "And here, and everywhere." She looked at this boy 8 years old now, his birthday having happened in March, with a dinner at Rowan's table, and a cake that Celeste had ordered from the bakery near her office, and that Eli had described as the best cake he'd ever had, which she suspected was generosity on his part, but had accepted with full sincerity regardless. "I'm glad too," she said. "Dad is different," Eli said. "Since you." She looked at him carefully. "Different how?" Eli thought about it with the genuine deliberation he gave things. "He laughs more," he said. "Not in a weird way, just more. Like he forgot he was allowed to, and then remembered." He paused. "He used to do the Doom Patrol thing." She blinked. "He told you about that?" "Mom told me," Eli said simply. "She said he was always doing reconnaissance on his own happiness." She said it like it was funny, but also like she meant it seriously. Celeste sat very still for a moment. "She was right," she said. "She was right about most things," Eli said. "I get it from her." He said this with complete seriousness, and then, "Dad says I get the modest part from him." "What did you say to that?" "I said that didn't make sense because he's not modest," Eli said. He said that was the joke. I told him it needed work. She laughed, actually laughed. The kind that has no performance in it, the kind that comes from being caught off guard by something real. Eli looked pleased with himself. "Okay," he said with the air of someone completing an agenda. "I just wanted to check on you." "I'm good," she said. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she said honestly. "Are you?" He considered this. "No," he said, "because I already know how it turns out." "How does it turn out?" He gave her the serious brown eyes. "Good," he said. Then he went back out to find his father. The ceremony was short, which both of them had wanted. The officiant, a civil celebrant named Helen, who had been recommended by one of the advocacy families, and who had the gift of saying true things without making them sound performed, kept it to the essentials. Rowan and Celeste had both written their own words, which they had not shared with each other in advance, and which turned out to be different in form and almost identical in substance, which made Helen smile and made Adrian cry again. Celeste spoke first. She had written 3 drafts and thrown all of them away, because they'd all been structured like arguments building to a conclusion, citing evidence, making a case. She'd been trained for 30 years to make cases. In the end, what she said was the thing she'd said to Rowan on the phone, weeks earlier, when he'd asked whether she was still nervous about the center's expansion, and she'd been honest in the particular way she'd gotten better at being honest. She said, "I spent a long time building a life where very little could touch me. I told myself it was strength. You showed me not by arguing with me, not by telling me I was wrong, but just by being the way you are that I'd confused protection with living. You walked through a set of doors because someone needed help, and you didn't ask for anything back, and that was the most disarming thing anyone had ever done to me. So here we are," she paused. "I love you," she said. "I love your son. I love the pasta on Tuesdays and the Doom Patrol instinct you're working on, and the way you look at things before you respond to them. I love the ceiling you fixed before anyone else knew it needed fixing. I am not looking for a perfect life. I am looking for a real one. You are the realest thing that has happened to me in a very long time." Rowan held her gaze through all of it. His eyes were doing something she'd seen once or twice before, the thing where he was feeling something completely and letting it be visible, which cost him something and which he paid anyway. When it was his turn, he was quiet for a moment in the particular way that was not hesitation but readiness. "I made myself small after Nora died," he said. "Not small in an obvious way. I still worked, I still raised Eli, I still showed up. But I'd decided somewhere in there that the most important thing was to not want anything for myself. Because wanting things for yourself meant those things could be taken away." He stopped. "Eli told me this past year that I was laughing more." He said it like it surprised him. It surprised me too. He looked at Celeste. You didn't fix me. I want to say that clearly, because you'd hate it if I said you fixed me, and also because it's not true. But you kept showing up, and you kept being honest, and you kept treating both of us like we were people worth knowing, rather than a situation that needed managing. And eventually, I ran out of reasons to do reconnaissance instead of just being there. He reached across and took her hand. She let him. I love you, he said. I love who you are in a room that isn't watching you, which is the same person you are in a room that is, and I don't take that for granted because I know how rare it is. I will never try to carry you anywhere you don't ask to be carried. I will walk beside you, and I will fix what I can reach, and I will tell Eli he was right. Helen said the words that made it official. Eli, to one side, nodded with the gravity of a man whose prediction had been confirmed. Later, after the dinner in the main hall, after Adrian's toast that was genuinely funny and only slightly legally inadvisable, after D. Reyes and Rowan had stood near the window for 20 minutes, in the way of people who have known each other through things they don't need to name. After Eli had been found asleep in the same chair in the observation deck, where he'd asked Celeste about the ankylosaur later, after everyone had gone and the center was quiet with the particular quiet of spaces that have held a lot of people and are now resting, Celeste and Rowan sat together in the training room. The lights were low. The city outside was doing its late-night thing, the ambient glow of it coming through the high windows at an angle that made the space look different again. Different from the afternoon, different from the workday, different from every other version of this room she knew. A new version. The kind of version you only get to see at the end of a day that mattered. Celeste was in her chair. Rowan was on the floor beside her, his back against the wall, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his shoulder without extending her arm. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Not the silence of people with nothing to say, the silence of people who don't need to fill every moment with language. What are you thinking about? He asked eventually. The gymnasium, she said. He nodded. I was thinking about it during the ceremony, she said. About what I was thinking when you walked through the doors. Before I knew who you were or what you could do. When you were just a man in a dusty jacket crossing a gymnasium floor. What were you thinking? She was quiet for a moment. I was thinking that no one was coming, she said. I'd counted the phones. I'd looked at the exits. I'd done the calculation. And I'd arrived at the conclusion that this was a thing that was happening to me, and the only resource I had was myself. She paused. And then the doors opened. And I thought too late, probably. Too late and likely not enough. She looked at him.
You were one person.
Travis had two with him, and more behind him. And you were just walking. Not running, not anything urgent. Just walking. Running signals panic, he said. Panic produces worse outcomes. I know that now, she said. Then I thought you were either very calm or very unaware of what you were walking into. Which did you settle on? Calm, she said. Something about the way you moved. She paused. And then you got there in 4 seconds, and I revised my understanding of what calm could mean. He was quiet. I thought about Eli, she said, immediately after. Not in a planning way. Just there was this boy who had done exactly what his father asked him to, who was standing by the doors where he'd been told to stand, watching. And something about that, the way he was just there, steady, trusting it was the most human thing in the room. It usually is, Rowan said. He's going to be extraordinary, she said. He already is, Rowan said. I just try not to tell him too often because he'll use it against me in the dog argument. She made the sound that was a laugh. He looked at her. Celeste, he said. Yeah, thank you for not being quiet. She held that. It took me a while, she said. That doesn't matter, he said. The while doesn't matter. The not quiet matters. She thought about the 11 statements. The families in the conference room. Dolores with her cane tapping the floor and saying, hold on to that. The 14-year-old. The 12-year-old who'd stopped going to school. The woman on the wait list who'd driven 40 minutes because someone in a parent network had told her there was a place that actually did the thing it said it did. She thought about what she'd learned in the past 14 months, in the way you learn things that don't go into categories, but instead simply become part of how you see. She'd learned that the people who do the most damage are rarely the ones who are obviously dangerous. They are the ones that systems protect. They are the ones for whom silence is manufactured not by conspiracy exactly, but by accumulated small choices, each one defensible on its own, that add up to a structure designed to absorb harm without acknowledging it. And the way you dismantle that structure is not with a single dramatic gesture. It is with the patient, unglamorous accumulation of documentation and testimony, and people who refuse to withdraw their statements. She'd learned that being in a wheelchair did not make her vulnerable in the way she'd spent 4 years believing. Being alone in rooms without exits made her vulnerable. Being in a world that treated visibility as a favor it dispensed selectively made her vulnerable. The chair was not the liability. The systems that were indifferent to her presence in them were the liability. And you change systems not by adapting yourself to their indifference, but by showing up, loudly and repeatedly and with lawyers, until the indifference became untenable. She'd learned that Rowan Voss made pasta on Tuesdays and was constitutionally incapable of walking past a loose ceiling fitting without doing something about it, and that these things, the pasta, the fitting, the particular way he occupied the world, as someone who fixed what he could reach without waiting to be asked, were not incidental to who he was, but the actual substance of him. She'd learned that Eli Voss was always right about the Triceratops, and that some things you just had to live with. I want to expand the advocacy component, she said, because her mind had done the thing it did, which was move toward the next problem even in the middle of the last good moment. Tonight, Rowan said.
Sad.
Not tonight specifically, she said. But yes, 3 more schools reached out last week. And I've been talking to a paralegal who runs a similar program in a different city, who's been trying to do it without infrastructure for years. If we built a model that could be replicated, Celeste. What? It's our wedding night. She looked at him. The advocacy program will still be there Monday, he said. She was quiet for a moment. That's fair, she said. The paralegal will still be there Monday, also fair. The schools will still, I said. It's fair, she said. He was doing the almost smile thing. She'd gotten better at reading it over the months, the particular compression at the corner of his mouth that was as close to openly amused as he usually got, and that she'd started to find, without particularly meaning to, one of the best things she knew. Rowan, she said. Yeah. The ceiling in here is solid, she said. I checked. I know, he said. I fixed it. I know you know, she said. I just wanted you to know that I noticed. He looked at her steadily. The low light. The city doing its night thing through the high windows. Eli asleep in the observation deck chair, under the planet blanket that had followed them from the apartment, because Rowan had thought to bring it. And Celeste had not been surprised at all to discover that he'd thought to bring it. I know you noticed, he said. You notice everything. I missed the cameras in the parking structure, she said. First visit, he said. You knew them by the second. Still nothing, he said. You notice things that matter. The rest is just practice. She looked at him for a long moment. 14 months ago, she had been alone in a gymnasium with her wrists on her armrests, and her exits calculated, and the conclusion that nothing was coming. 14 months ago, this man had been an anonymous construction worker in a dusty jacket who would drive home after and make pasta on Tuesday and try to be present enough for his son and small enough not to want anything for himself. 14 months ago, they'd both been very, very good at not wanting things. And here they were. In the training room of a building that was teaching 31 families how to not be quiet, on the other side of 11 statements and a parking garage and a 17-year-old who discovered too late that some people don't go away, with a boy asleep in the next room who had told her, in an office with a folding mirror, that he already knew how it turned out. Good, he'd said. It turns out good. He hadn't been wrong. He was almost never wrong, which Celeste intended to tell him regularly for the rest of his life, in the particular way that adults tell children things that are absolutely true and slightly inconvenient. Outside, the city made its sounds. The center was quiet with the quiet of something that had become real. Rowan was beside her, close enough to touch, and she did. She reached out and put her hand on his shoulder, simply the way you touch someone when you're not thinking about the gesture, when it's just the natural position. He covered her hand with his. They sat there for a while, in the room where they'd fixed things and broken holds, and practiced the patient work of learning how to stand in a room without making yourself small. Not a perfect ending. Neither of them would have believed a perfect ending. But a real one, which had always, for both of them, been the only kind worth having.